Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I noticed it because of the gap. I wasn't even looking for anything unusual. I'd just gotten into the habit of checking my cameras in the morning while I had coffee. Nothing serious, just making sure nothing weird happened overnight. My name's Trevor. I live in a small rental on the edge of a newer development, kind of backed up against a stretch of empty lots that never got built on. I have two cameras, one facing the driveway, one covering the backyard. That morning, I opened the app like I always do and scrubbed through the overnight footage. Everything looked normal at first. Dark yard, occasional headlights from a car passing on the street, nothing out of place. Then I hit a section where the timeline jumped. It went from 2:16:08 straight to 2:16:15. 7 seconds missing. I frowned and dragged the cursor back. Played it again, slower this time. At 2:16:08, everything was normal. Then the entire frame went white. Not bright like a light turning on, more like the image had been overwhelmed, like the camera couldn't handle whatever it was seeing. The next frame was already at 2:16:15, normal again. I leaned closer to the screen, replayed it, same thing, normal, flash, jump forward. I checked the driveway camera, same timestamp, same flash, same missing seconds. That got my attention. I paused the video right before the flash and looked carefully. The yard looked completely normal, no movement, no shadows, nothing. I advanced one frame. The screen was washed out, not pure white, but close. You could barely make out shapes underneath. I zoomed in. The outline of the fence was still there, faintly, the ground, the side of the house. But everything was flattened, like the light had come from everywhere at once. No direction, no source. I scrubbed through that section a few more times, each time the same thing. Flash, missing time. I checked the system logs. No errors, no interruptions. The cameras didn't register anything wrong, just a gap. I sat back trying to think of a normal explanation. Lightning, maybe. But there hadn't been any storms. I checked the weather from that night. Clear, no rain, no thunder. I replayed it again. This time I turned the sound on. Right before the flash, I could hear the usual nighttime noise. Crickets, a faint breeze. Then at the exact moment the screen washed out, silence. Not quiet. Complete absence of sound. Then it came back immediately after. I played that part a few more times, every time the same pattern. Sound, nothing. Sound again. I felt a little uneasy, but I kept going. I checked the backyard camera again, this time frame by frame. Right before the flash, I noticed something I hadn't seen at normal speed. The shadows shifted, just slightly, like something had changed the direction of the light for a fraction of a second. But there wasn't any light source in the frame that could have done that. I paused it and stared. The shadow from the fence leaned the wrong way. Then the flash hit. Then everything went back to normal. I stood up and walked to the back window, looked out into the yard. Morning light, clear. Nothing unusual. I stepped outside. The grass looked normal. The fence, the ground, no marks, no signs of anything. I walked to the center of the yard, standing roughly where the camera was pointed. Looked up. Clear sky. Nothing there. I went back inside and checked the footage again. This time, I noticed something else. The time gap wasn't consistent across both cameras. The driveway camera skipped 7 seconds. The backyard one skipped 9. That didn't make sense. If it was just a recording issue, they should have matched. I replayed both side by side. The flash happened at the same moment, but the recovery point was different, like they'd lost different chunks of time. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screens. That's when I noticed something small. At the very edge of the frame, just before the flash, there was a faint glow. Not bright, just a soft, pale light creeping in from the top corner. I zoomed in. It didn't look like a beam or a reflection, more like the edge of something, just barely visible. I advanced one frame, flash, gone. I went outside again, this time walking around to the side of the house, trying to line up where that edge of light would have come from. There was nothing there, just open space above the yard. I stood there for a minute, looking up. The sky felt normal, but something about it didn't sit right. I went back inside and checked the rest of the footage. Nothing else unusual. Just that one moment, that one burst of light, and the missing time. Later that day, I called my neighbor, Luis, who lives 2 houses down, asked if he'd noticed anything weird the night before. He hesitated for a second, then said, "Like what?" I told him about the cameras, the flash, the gap. There was a pause. Then he said, "My power flickered for a second last night. Around that time, I think." "Just a flicker?" I asked. "Yeah, didn't even reset anything. Just dimmed for a moment." I looked back at my screen. "Do you remember what time?" "After 2, I think. I was still up." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "All right." We hung up. I sat there for a while, replaying the footage again, looking for anything I'd missed. I didn't find anything new, but something about it kept bothering me. That night, I checked the cameras again before going to bed. Everything looked normal. No glitches, no flashes. I went to sleep. Sometime during the night, I woke up. I didn't know why. The room was dark, quiet, but there was a faint brightness coming through the curtains. Not like streetlight. Different. I sat up slightly, listening. No sound. I got out of bed and walked to the window, pulled the curtain back just enough to look outside. The yard was dark, completely normal. I stood there for a second. Then I noticed something. The timestamp on the camera feed, still open on my phone, read 2:16 a.m., exactly the same time as the night before. I stared at it. Then the screen flickered, just for a frame, and the time jumped forward. I noticed the compass first because it didn't match the trail. I was hiking a ridge up in Snowdonia, not far from where the marked path splits off toward a higher overlook. It was late afternoon, maybe around 5, and the weather had been shifting all day. Low clouds rolling in and out, bits of sun breaking through, then disappearing again. Nothing unusual for up there. I'd done that route once before with a friend, Tom, so I wasn't completely unfamiliar with it. Still, I brought a compass out of habit more than anything. Signal gets patchy, and I didn't want to rely on my phone. The path was pretty clear at first, narrow, rocky, but easy enough to follow. After about an hour, it started thinning out. Less defined, more like a suggestion of where people had walked before. That's when I checked the compass. It was off. Not wildly, just slightly. The needle was pointing maybe 10 degrees away from where it should have been based on the map. I tapped it with my finger, thinking maybe it was sticking. It moved, then settled back to the same wrong position. I turned in place slowly, watching it. The needle lagged behind my movement by a fraction, then caught up, but still didn't line up right. I remember thinking maybe there was something metallic nearby throwing it off. But there was nothing around except rocks and grass. I shrugged it off and kept going, using the terrain instead. A few minutes later, I checked it again. Still off, same angle. That's when I started paying more attention. The air had gone really still. Up on a ridge, you usually feel at least some wind, even a light breeze. But there was nothing, not even enough to move the grass. It felt held in place. I stopped walking and listened. No birds, no distant sounds, just this quiet that felt thicker than normal. I took a step forward. My boot scraped against the rock louder than it should have. It echoed slightly, but not outward. More like it stayed close, contained. I checked the compass again. The needle had shifted a bit more. Now it was maybe 15 degrees off. I turned slowly, trying to line it up with the direction I'd come from. It didn't, not even close. That's when I felt that slight pressure in my ears. It came on quick, like when you gain elevation too fast, but I hadn't climbed much in the last 10 minutes. I swallowed, tried to clear it. Didn't help. I looked around, trying to get my bearings without the compass. The ridge stretched out in both directions, rolling hills and patches of rock. The horizon was hazy from the low clouds. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. I decided to keep moving toward the overlook I'd planned to reach. It wasn't far, maybe another 10 minutes. As I walked, I kept glancing at the compass. The needle didn't correct itself. If anything, it drifted slightly more off each time I checked. I started marking small details in my head. A cluster of rocks, a bend in the ridge, just in case I needed to retrace my steps. After a few minutes, I noticed something else. My footsteps sounded inconsistent, sometimes loud, sharp against the rock. Other times almost muted, like I was stepping on something soft, even though it was the same terrain. I stopped again. The silence pressed in. Then I saw the light. It was low on the horizon, just above where the ridge dipped down. Faint, almost blending into the haze. At first I thought it was the sun catching something, but the angle was wrong. The sun was behind the clouds off to my left. This light was directly ahead. It pulsed once, not bright, not like a flash, just a soft increase and decrease in brightness, like a slow blink. I stared at it, trying to figure out what it could be. There were no buildings out there, no roads, nothing that should have been emitting light. I took a few steps toward it. The pressure in my ears increased. The compass needle shifted again. This time it didn't settle, it drifted slowly like it was searching for something, then stopped at a new angle. Completely wrong. I turned my body to match it. The landscape didn't line up with what I expected at all. For a second, I felt disoriented, like I'd spun around without realizing it. I looked back over my shoulder. The path I'd been following wasn't as clear anymore. It was still there, but it looked less defined, like it had faded slightly. I blinked, trying to focus. It didn't change. I turned back toward the light. It pulsed again, same slow, subtle brightening, then dimming. And for a split second, I thought I saw something above it. Not a shape exactly. More like the air itself shifted, like heat rising off a road, but colder in tone. It moved slightly to one side, then disappeared. My chest tightened. I checked the compass again. The needle was still drifting. Not fast, just slowly rotating, like it couldn't settle on a direction. That's when I noticed the ground. Right where I was standing, the grass wasn't moving at all. But a few feet away, further down the ridge, I could see it shifting slightly, like there was a breeze there, just not where I was. I took a step forward. The moment I did, the pressure in my ears spiked, sharp enough to make me wince. The light on the horizon pulsed again, and this time it seemed closer. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed it had grown slightly larger. I stopped moving. The pressure eased a little. I stood there, trying to think clearly. Nothing about this felt right. The compass wasn't working. The path behind me looked wrong. The light was doing something I couldn't explain. I took a step back. The pressure dropped immediately. The compass needle slowed its drifting. I took another step back. Same thing. That's when I realized something. Whatever was happening seemed tied to where I was standing. I looked at the ground again, trying to see if there was anything different about it. At first, nothing stood out. Then I noticed a faint discoloration in the grass. A rough circle, maybe a couple meters across, slightly darker than the surrounding area. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it. I stepped out of it completely. The moment I did, everything changed. The pressure in my ears vanished. The compass needle snapped back to normal, pointing steady and correct. The silence broke. I could hear the wind again, faint but there. Distant sounds carried across the ridge. I turned back toward the horizon. The light was gone, completely. No glow, no pulse, nothing. Just the usual haze. I looked back at the spot I'd been standing in. From where I was now, the circle in the grass was harder to see. It almost blended in completely. I stepped closer, just enough to get a better look, but not fully into it. The air near it felt slightly cooler. Not by much, just enough to notice. I checked the compass again. Still normal. I didn't step back into the circle. I turned and followed the ridge back the way I'd come. The path looked clearer now, more defined, like it had before. I kept checking the compass every few minutes. It stayed steady. After about 20 minutes, I reached a more obvious section of trail and started heading down. As I descended, the weather shifted again. Light wind, clouds moving faster. Everything felt normal. When I got back to the car, I checked the time. 7:42. That didn't line up. I'd expected it to be closer to 6:30 based on when I'd checked earlier. I stood there for a bit, trying to work it out. It didn't add up. I drove home, not really thinking about anything else. Later that night, I took the compass out again, just to see if it was faulty. It worked perfectly. Pointed exactly where it should. No drifting, no delay. I haven't been back to that ridge since. But every now and then, when I'm outside somewhere quiet, I catch myself checking which way I'm facing without thinking. And sometimes, for a second, it feels like the direction doesn't quite match where I am. It started as a noise I couldn't place. I was sitting in my living room, maybe around 10 at night, just half watching TV. It wasn't loud, and at first I thought it was part of whatever show was on. But when I muted it, the sound stayed. It wasn't really a sound, exactly. More like a vibration. Low, steady, like something big running far away. Not a rumble like thunder, more consistent than that. Almost like a generator you can feel more than hear. I live in a pretty quiet suburban area. No factories nearby, no train lines. The loudest thing you usually get at night is someone's car going past or a dog barking. This was different. I stood up and walked around the room, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It didn't get louder or quieter, depending on where I stood. It just stayed the same. That's when I noticed I could feel it in the floor. Barely, but it was there. A faint buzzing under my feet. I went into the kitchen, checked the fridge, thinking maybe it was that. But when I put my hand on it, it felt normal. Same with the boiler. Nothing seemed out of place. I texted my neighbor, Callum, who lived in the house attached to mine, just asked if he could hear anything weird. He replied like 2 minutes later, "No? What do you mean?" I didn't really know how to explain it, so I just said, "Never mind." The vibration kept going. After about 10 minutes of trying to ignore it, I started getting this restless feeling, like I needed to step outside and check, so I grabbed my jacket and went out the front door. The moment I stepped outside, it stopped. Not faded, not slowly died down, just completely gone. The silence hit me straight away. It felt heavier than normal, like everything had just been turned off. No cars, no wind. Even the usual distant noise from the main road wasn't there. I stood on the pavement for a few seconds, just listening. Nothing. I actually took a few steps down the driveway, thinking maybe I'd hear it again once I got further from the house. Still nothing. I looked up and down the street. A couple of houses had lights on, but everything looked normal. No one else outside. I checked my phone. No signal. That was weird. I always had at least a bar or two outside. Inside the house could be patchy, but not outside. I walked a bit further, out to the middle of the road, just to see if anything changed. Still completely quiet. Then I noticed the air. It felt off. Not colder, not warmer, just still in a way that didn't feel natural. Like the air wasn't moving at all. Even on a calm night, you usually feel something, right? A slight breeze or shift. There was none of that. I stood there for maybe a minute, trying to figure out what I was even doing. Then I saw something at the far end of the street. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, like a light bouncing off a window, but it didn't behave like one. It was a faint glow, low to the ground, kind of bluish. Not bright, but noticeable because everything else was so dark. It moved slowly across the road, not like a car. There were no headlights, no sound, nothing solid I could see, just that glow drifting from one side to the other. I squinted, trying to make it out better. For a second, it looked like there was something around it. Not a shape exactly, more like the space around it was distorted, like heat coming off asphalt but cooler in color. It crossed the road and slipped behind a parked van. I waited for it to come out the other side. It didn't. I started walking toward it, slowly at first. My footsteps sounded too loud again, like earlier in the house when everything else had gone quiet. As I got closer, that vibration came back. Same low, steady feeling, but now it was stronger. I could feel it in my chest, like a hum under my ribs. I stopped walking. The van was maybe 15 feet ahead of me. Old white thing, hadn't moved in weeks. I stared at the space behind it, waiting to see that glow again. Nothing. The vibration kept going, though. I took another step forward. The moment I did, the glow reappeared. Not behind the van, but above it. That's what threw me. It wasn't where it should have been. It was hovering just over the roof, maybe a foot or two above it. Still faint, still that same bluish color. And again, the air around it looked wrong, like it was bending slightly. I felt this sudden pressure in my ears, like when you go underwater. I froze. The glow didn't move for a second. Then it shifted slowly, drifting off the van and into the middle of the road. No sound, just that vibration. I realized I was holding my breath. It moved toward me, not fast, not aggressive, just steady. I took a step back without thinking. It adjusted. That's the only way I can describe it. It didn't just keep going straight. It angled slightly, like it was tracking where I was. My stomach dropped. I backed up another step. Same thing. It changed direction again, staying lined up with me. I turned around and walked back toward my house, trying not to panic. The vibration got stronger with every step. By the time I reached my driveway, it felt like my teeth were buzzing. I glanced back. It had stopped at the edge of the pavement, right where my driveway met the road, just hovering there. The glow flickered slightly, not like a light bulb, more like it was struggling to stay consistent. I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock the door. My hands felt clumsy, like they weren't quite responding right. The moment I got the door open and stepped inside, everything cut out again. The vibration, the glow, the pressure in my ears, all gone, just like before. I shut the door behind me and leaned against it for a second, listening. Nothing unusual, just the normal sounds of the house, the fridge humming, the faint ticking of the clock in the kitchen. I went straight to the front window and looked out. The street was normal again. I could hear distant traffic now. A car drove past at the end of the road. Everything looked exactly like it always did. The van was still there, no glow. I stayed there for a while, just watching. After maybe 5 minutes, my phone buzzed. Signal was back. It was another message from Callum. "You sure you're good?" Lights flickered here for a bit. I didn't reply. I went around the house checking everything, not even sure what I was looking for. At some point, I noticed the time. 11:52. That didn't line up. I'd checked earlier when I muted the TV. It had been just after 10. There was no way I'd been outside that long. I went to bed eventually, but I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I went out to the driveway. Right where I'd seen it stop, there was a faint mark on the ground. Not burned, not damaged, just different. Like the color of the pavement had shifted slightly in a small circle. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it. I checked around the van too. Nothing there. I asked Callum later if he'd seen anything else that night. He said no, just the lights flickering for a second, like a power dip. I didn't mention the glow. That vibration hasn't come back since. But every now and then, late at night, I catch myself listening for it. And sometimes, just for a second, I think I can feel it again under the floor. I noticed the compass first because it didn't match the trail. I was hiking a ridge up in Snowdonia, not far from where the marked path splits off toward a higher overlook. It was late afternoon, maybe around 5, and the weather had been shifting all day. Low clouds rolling in and out, bits of sun breaking through, then disappearing again. Nothing unusual for up there. I'd done that route once before with a friend, Tom, so I wasn't completely unfamiliar with it. Still, I brought a compass out of habit more than anything. Signal gets patchy, and I didn't want to rely on my phone. The path was pretty clear at first, narrow, rocky, but easy enough to follow. After about an hour, it started thinning out. Less defined, more like a suggestion of where people had walked before. That's when I checked the compass. It was off. Not wildly, just slightly. The needle was pointing maybe 10 degrees away from where it should have been based on the map. I tapped it with my finger, thinking maybe it was sticking. It moved, then settled back to the same wrong position. I turned in place slowly, watching it. The needle lagged behind my movement by a fraction, then caught up, but still didn't line up right. I remember thinking maybe there was something metallic nearby throwing it off. But there was nothing around except rocks and grass. I shrugged it off and kept going, using the terrain instead. A few minutes later, I checked it again. Still off, same angle. That's when I started paying more attention. The air had gone really still. Up on a ridge, you usually feel at least some wind, even a light breeze. But there was nothing, not even enough to move the grass. It felt held in place. I stopped walking and listened. No birds, no distant sounds, just this quiet that felt thicker than normal. I took a step forward. My boot scraped against the rock louder than it should have. It echoed slightly, but not outward. More like it stayed close, contained. I checked the compass again. The needle had shifted a bit more. Now it was maybe 15 degrees off. I turned slowly, trying to line it up with the direction I'd come from. It didn't, not even close. That's when I felt that slight pressure in my ears. It came on quick, like when you gain elevation too fast, but I hadn't climbed much in the last 10 minutes. I swallowed, tried to clear it. Didn't help. I looked around, trying to get my bearings without the compass. The ridge stretched out in both directions, rolling hills and patches of rock. The horizon was hazy from the low clouds. Everything looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. I decided to keep moving toward the overlook I'd planned to reach. It wasn't far, maybe another 10 minutes. As I walked, I kept glancing at the compass. The needle didn't correct itself. If anything, it drifted slightly more off each time I checked. I started marking small details in my head, a cluster of rocks, a bend in the ridge, just in case I needed to retrace my steps. After a few minutes, I noticed something else. My footsteps sounded inconsistent, sometimes loud, sharp against the rock. Other times almost muted, like I was stepping on something soft, even though it was the same terrain. I stopped again. The silence pressed in. Then I saw the light. It was low on the horizon, just above where the ridge dipped down. Faint, almost blending into the haze. At first I thought it was the sun catching something, but the angle was wrong. The sun was behind the clouds off to my left. This light was directly ahead. It pulsed once, not bright, not like a flash, just a soft increase and decrease in brightness, like a slow blink. I stared at it, trying to figure out what it could be. There were no buildings out there, no roads, nothing that should have been emitting light. I took a few steps toward it. The pressure in my ears increased. The compass needle shifted again. This time it didn't settle, it drifted slowly like it was searching for something, then stopped at a new angle. Completely wrong. I turned my body to match it. The landscape didn't line up with what I expected at all. For a second, I felt disoriented, like I'd spun around without realizing it. I looked back over my shoulder. The path I'd been following wasn't as clear anymore. It was still there, but it looked less defined, like it had faded slightly. I blinked, trying to focus. It didn't change. I turned back toward the light. It pulsed again, same slow, subtle brightening, then dimming. And for a split second, I thought I saw something above it. Not a shape exactly. More like the air itself shifted, like heat rising off a road, but colder in tone. It moved slightly to one side, then disappeared. My chest tightened. I checked the compass again. The needle was still drifting. Not fast, just slowly rotating, like it couldn't settle on a direction. That's when I noticed the ground. Right where I was standing, the grass wasn't moving at all. But a few feet away, further down the ridge, I could see it shifting slightly, like there was a breeze there, just not where I was. I took a step forward. The moment I did, the pressure in my ears spiked, sharp enough to make me wince. The light on the horizon pulsed again, and this time it seemed closer. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed it had grown slightly larger. I stopped moving. The pressure eased a little. I stood there, trying to think clearly. Nothing about this felt right. The compass wasn't working. The path behind me looked wrong. The light was doing something I couldn't explain. I took a step back. The pressure dropped immediately. The compass needle slowed its drifting. I took another step back. Same thing. That's when I realized something. Whatever was happening seemed tied to where I was standing. I looked at the ground again, trying to see if there was anything different about it. At first, nothing stood out. Then I noticed a faint discoloration in the grass. A rough circle, maybe a couple meters across, slightly darker than the surrounding area. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it. I stepped out of it completely. The moment I did, everything changed. The pressure in my ears vanished. The compass needle snapped back to normal, pointing steady and correct. The silence broke. I could hear the wind again, faint but there. Distant sounds carried across the ridge. I turned back toward the horizon. The light was gone, completely. No glow, no pulse, nothing. Just the usual haze. I looked back at the spot I'd been standing in. From where I was, I stepped outside because I thought I heard something on the roof. It was early morning, just after 5. Still dark, but that lighter kind of dark right before sunrise. I live out near a reservoir, small row of houses with fields behind them. It's usually quiet that time of day, apart from the odd bird or wind. That morning, though, it felt too quiet. I'd been half awake in bed when I heard a dull thud above me. Not loud, just enough to notice, like something landing or shifting. I waited for it to happen again, but it didn't. After a minute or two, I got up, threw on a hoodie, and went outside to check. The air was cold and damp. There was a light fog hanging low over the ground, not thick enough to block anything, just enough to soften edges. The street was empty. No cars, no people. I stood there for a second, looking up at the roofline. Nothing. No movement, no sound. Everything looked normal. I stepped a bit further out onto the pavement, craning my neck to get a better angle. That's when I felt it. A sudden pressure in my ears, like when you go up in an elevator too fast. I swallowed, expecting it to clear, but it didn't. It wasn't painful, just there, like something had shifted in the air around me. I looked around, half expecting to hear a plane or something overhead. Nothing. No engine noise, no wind, just that same quiet. I rubbed my ear and looked up again. That's when I saw the light. It was faint, really faint. If I hadn't already been staring at the sky, I probably would have missed it. Just a small point. Maybe slightly brighter than a star, but lower. Moving slowly across the sky from one side to the other. At first, I assumed it was a satellite. You see them sometimes if it's clear enough. But the movement didn't quite match. It wasn't steady. It drifted, almost like it was adjusting its path in small, subtle ways. I took a few steps out into the street to keep it in view. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I swallowed again, trying to clear it, but it just made it more noticeable. The light kept moving, slow and deliberate. I noticed something else then. The fog below me wasn't moving. It just sat there, completely still. No breeze pushing it, no shifting patterns. That didn't feel right. Even on calm mornings, there's usually some movement. I looked back up at the light. It had stopped. Just stopped in place. That's what made my stomach tighten a bit. Satellites don't stop. Planes don't stop. This thing just hovered there, silent. The pressure in my ears peaked. It felt like my head was being squeezed slightly from the inside. I took a step back toward my driveway, not really thinking about it. The moment I moved, the light shifted. Not quickly, just enough that I noticed it had adjusted its position again, like it was staying aligned with me. I froze. It didn't move further, just stayed there, faint and steady. I felt suddenly very aware of how exposed I was standing in the middle of the street. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone else outside. Nothing. Every house was dark, no movement anywhere. I looked back up. The light had gotten slightly brighter. Still dim overall, but more noticeable now that it had intensified. And around it, I thought I saw something else. Not a shape exactly, more like the space around it wasn't behaving right. Like the stars behind it were distorted, slightly stretched or blurred like looking through uneven glass. I blinked a couple times trying to focus. The effect stayed. The light drifted again, slowly. The pressure in my ears eased just a little as it moved. I took another step back. It adjusted again. Same pattern. That's when I felt it in my chest. Not a vibration like before, more like a subtle pull, like when you stand too close to something heavy and you feel off balance without knowing why. I turned toward my house, thinking I should just go back inside. As I did, I noticed something in the reflection of my window. The light wasn't just above me anymore. It was lower. Not by much, but enough that it shouldn't have been possible without me seeing it descend. I turned back quickly. It was still there in the sky, but now it looked closer. Bigger, slightly. The distortion around it was clearer too. For a second, I could almost make out a vague outline around the light. Not solid, not defined, just a suggestion of something there. My ears popped suddenly, hard enough to make me flinch. The pressure dropped all at once. The light dimmed, and then it started moving again. This time, it didn't drift. It just slid across the sky in a straight line, smooth and silent. Within a few seconds, it was further away, shrinking back down to that faint point. Then it faded completely. I stood there for a moment just staring at the empty sky. The fog around me started moving again, slowly drifting across the ground. I could hear distant birds now, faint but there. Everything felt normal again. I went back inside, shut the door, and leaned against it. My ears still felt off, like after a flight. I checked the time on my phone. 6:12. That didn't make sense. When I got up, it had been just after 5. I hadn't been outside that long. I went back to the window and looked out again. The street was the same. Nothing unusual. Later that morning, once it was fully light out, I went back outside to the same spot. Everything looked completely normal. But when I stood there, right in the middle of the road, I noticed something strange. The air felt slightly cooler in that exact spot. Not dramatically, just enough to notice if you stood still. I moved a step to the side, normal temperature. Stepped back, cool again. It wasn't strong. You could easily miss it, but it was there. I checked above me. Clear sky, no sign of anything. I stood there for a while trying to convince myself it was just in my head. Eventually, I went back inside. I haven't heard anything on the roof since. But sometimes early in the morning, I wake up with that same pressure in my ears. And for a second, before I fully wake up, it feels like something is directly above the house. I noticed the glow before I felt anything in the line. I was out on a small lake about 20 minutes from town, one of those places locals know but doesn't show up on most maps. No dock lights, no houses right on the shore, just trees and a narrow gravel access road. My name's Kyle. I fish at night a lot, especially in the summer when it cools down. That night was calm, no wind, barely any ripples on the surface. The water was almost flat, reflecting just enough of the sky to make it feel darker than it actually was. I was sitting in a small aluminum boat, maybe 30 yards from the shoreline, engine off, just drifting a little. My line was out, nothing biting. I remember checking my phone, 12:43 a.m. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just the way the water was reflecting the stars. A faint light under the surface, but it didn't stay still. It moved. A soft glow just below the water, maybe a few feet down. Pale, almost white with a hint of blue. It traveled in a straight line, not drifting, not wavering, just cutting across the water beneath me. I leaned forward slightly, squinting. It wasn't very bright. If I hadn't been looking directly at that spot, I probably would have missed it. The glow passed under the side of the boat. No disturbance on the surface, no ripple, no wake, just that faint light moving below. I lifted my rod slightly, checking the tension. Nothing. No pull, no vibration. The line hung still in the water. The glow continued past me, heading toward the far side of the lake, perfectly straight. That's what stood out. Fish don't move like that. Nothing in the water does. Not like that. I shifted in my seat, turning to follow it. The metal of the boat creaked quietly under me. The sound felt too loud. The glow didn't react, didn't change speed, didn't shift direction. It just kept going. I stood up slowly, balancing carefully. The boat rocked slightly. Still nothing on the surface, no sign that anything was moving below. But I could see it, clear enough to track. The glow stretched a little as it moved. Not like it was growing, more like it had length, like a narrow band instead of a point. I felt that tightness in my chest again. The same kind of feeling you get when something doesn't fit. I looked toward the shoreline it was heading for. Dark trees, still water, no lights. The glow moved closer to the edge. Then about 10 feet from the shore, it started to fade. Not suddenly, gradually. The brightness dropped, the edges softened, then it was gone. Just like that. No change in the water, no ripple, no sign it had ever been there. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the spot, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The lake went back to looking completely normal. Dark. Still. I sat back down slowly, picked up my rod again. My hands felt a little unsteady. I told myself it was probably some kind of reflection, or maybe something in the water I didn't recognize, but it didn't sit right. I checked my phone again, 12:51 a.m. That made me pause. It hadn't felt like 8 minutes, more like 2. I looked back out across the water. Everything looked the same, no glow, no movement. I cast my line again, let it settle, then I waited. A few minutes passed. Nothing. Then I noticed something else. The water near the boat felt heavier. Not visually, just the way it looked, like it had depth in a different way. I leaned over slightly, looking straight down. Dark, but I could still see a faint reflection of the sky. Then, for just a second, I thought I saw the glow again. Not moving, just sitting there, directly beneath me. I froze, held my breath. The glow didn't brighten, didn't shift, just stayed there. Faint, barely visible. Then it disappeared. I pulled back quickly, almost losing my balance. The boat rocked. Water lapped softly against the sides. I sat down hard, heart beating faster now. I looked around. Nothing. No sound. No movement. Just the quiet lake. I checked my line again. Still nothing. I reeled it in halfway, then stopped. I didn't feel like being out there anymore. I grabbed the oar and started pulling towards shore. Each stroke sounded louder than it should. The water moved normally now, ripples spreading out from the boat, everything behaving the way it should. But I kept looking over the side, half expecting to see that glow again. Nothing showed. When I got close to shore, I slowed down. The water was shallower there. Clearer. I could see the bottom faintly. Rocks, weeds, nothing unusual. I stepped out of the boat, pulling it onto the gravel edge. The sound of it scraping felt sharp in the quiet. I stood there for a second, looking back out over the lake. Dark. Still. Normal. I loaded my gear quickly, didn't linger. When I got in my truck, I checked the time again, 1:18 a.m. That made me frown. I was sure I'd left the water not long after 12:50. It hadn't felt like 25 minutes. I started the engine. The headlights cut across the trees. I pulled out onto the gravel road and started heading back. About halfway down, I slowed and glanced in the rearview mirror. The lake was barely visible through the trees, just a dark shape. But, for a moment, I thought I saw a faint line of light. Out on the water, moving slowly in a straight path, then it disappeared before I could focus on it. The power went out right as I was rinsing a plate. No warning, just everything cutting to black at once. The fridge hum stopped, the overhead light snapped off, even the little standby light on the microwave disappeared. I stood there for a second with my hands in the sink, waiting for it to come back. Sometimes it does that around here when the weather's bad, but it didn't. I looked out the kitchen window. The whole street was dark. No porch lights, no TV glow through windows. Just this faint orange from the sky, like the usual light pollution. It had been storming earlier that evening. Not heavy, just steady rain and low clouds. By the time the power went out, the rain had mostly stopped, but everything was still wet. I could hear water dripping off the gutter outside. I grabbed my phone off the counter and turned the flashlight on. No signal. That wasn't totally unusual during outages, but it still added to the feeling. I walked into the living room, checking if anything had tripped inside. Fuse box looked fine, no weird smells, nothing obvious. The house just felt empty without the background noise. No fridge, no clock ticking, nothing. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The air was damp and cool, the kind of quiet you get after rain, but heavier. A couple houses down, I saw someone else outside, my neighbor Rena. She was standing at the end of her driveway, looking up at the sky. "Yours out too?" I called. "Yeah," she said. "Whole street, I think." Her voice sounded flat, like it didn't carry properly. I stepped off the porch and walked toward her. As I got closer, I noticed she wasn't just looking up randomly. She was focused on one spot. I followed her gaze. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just clouds, low and thick, kind of reflecting the usual city glow. Then I noticed the color. There was a patch of sky, maybe directly above the middle of the street, that looked slightly off. Faintly blue, not bright, not glowing like a light source, just tinted, like someone had layered a soft blue filter over that section of clouds. "Do you see that?" she said. "What is that?" She didn't answer. We both just stood there watching it. It didn't move with the clouds. That's what stood out first. The rest of the sky was shifting slowly like you'd expect after rain, but that blue patch stayed fixed. I stepped a little further into the road to get a better angle. The moment I did, I felt something strange under my feet. A faint vibration. Not strong, not like something shaking the ground. More like a low buzz, similar to standing near heavy machinery far away. I paused, testing it by shifting my weight. It was definitely there. "Can you feel that?" I asked. Rena hesitated. "Feel what?" "Like, the ground. Is it vibrating?" She stepped forward a bit, then stopped. "Yeah, I think so." We both went quiet again. The blue patch in the sky seemed to deepen slightly. Still faint, but more noticeable now that we were focused on it. I realized something else. There were no other lights anywhere. Not just the street. The entire horizon was dark. No distant glow from town, no flickering from other neighborhoods. It was like everything for miles had gone out. That didn't seem right. The vibration got a little stronger. I could feel it in my chest now, not just through my shoes. Rena wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't like this." "Probably just a transformer or something," I said, but it didn't sound convincing even to me. The air felt heavier, like before a storm, but there were no clouds building. No wind either. Then the blue patch changed. It didn't expand exactly. It just sharpened. The edges became more defined, like it was separating from the rest of the sky. And for a second, I thought I saw depth to it, not like a hole or anything obvious, just a sense that it wasn't flat like the clouds around it. I squinted, trying to focus. That's when the vibration peaked. It wasn't loud, but it was intense. My ears started to feel pressured, like I needed to pop them. Rena stepped back suddenly. "Okay, no, that's..." She didn't finish. The blue light brightened. Not suddenly, not like a flash. Just a quick, smooth increase, like someone turning up a dimmer switch. For maybe 3 or 4 seconds, the whole street was tinted blue. Not illuminated exactly. Shadows were still there, but everything had that color to it. The houses, the road, even Rena's face. During that moment, I noticed something above us. Shapes. Not solid, not clear, but something moved across that blue patch. Large, slow, like shadows passing behind frosted glass. I couldn't make out edges or details, just movement. My stomach dropped. I took a step back without thinking. The vibration held steady, almost like it was waiting. Then it all stopped. The blue faded instantly, like it had been switched off. The vibration cut out at the same time, and a second later, the power came back. Every house lit up at once. Streetlights flickered on. The hum of electricity filled the air again. It was so sudden it made me flinch. Rena let out a shaky laugh. "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer. I was still looking at the sky. It was normal again. Just low clouds reflecting the usual orange glow. No blue, no shapes. Just regular night. We stood there for a bit longer, but nothing else happened. Eventually, she went back inside. I did the same. The house felt loud again with everything running. I checked my phone, still no signal for a minute or two, then it came back. There were no alerts, no messages about outages or anything unusual. The next day, I asked a couple other neighbors if they saw anything. Most of them just mentioned the power cut. One guy, Malik, said his lights flickered twice before going out, but that was it. No one mentioned the sky. Later that afternoon, I walked out into the street again, just standing roughly where I had been. Everything looked completely normal, but when I looked down, I noticed something odd on the pavement. A faint discoloration, like a wide patch where the surface looked slightly dulled compared to the rest. It stretched across part of the road, right under where that blue patch had been. I rubbed my shoe over it, thinking maybe it was just leftover moisture or oil. It didn't change. It wasn't anything obvious. You'd walk right over it without noticing. But it was there. That night, the power stayed on. Everything was normal. Except every now and then, usually when it got really quiet, I'd feel that same faint vibration through the floor for a second or two. Not strong enough to be sure, just enough to make me stop and listen. I noticed it because it didn't make sense with the road. I was driving back from my sister's place out past Huddersfield, cutting through this long stretch of empty road that runs between fields and low hills. It was late, maybe around 1:30 in the morning. No streetlights out there, just my headlights and the occasional reflector post. It had been raining earlier, but it stopped about half an hour before I left. The road was still wet though, so everything had that faint shine to it. My headlights were catching on the asphalt, the grass at the edges, the fences. Normal stuff. I was doing maybe 50, just cruising, no music on, just the engine and tires. That's when I saw the reflection. At first, I thought it was a sign. You know how road signs catch your headlights and flare up for a second? It looked like that, just a small bright flicker ahead, but it wasn't where a sign would be. It was in the air, maybe 10, 15 feet above the road, slightly off to the left. I slowed down a bit, squinting at it. The reflection didn't disappear like a sign would once you pass the right angle. It stayed there, steady, like something was actually reflecting the light back at me. I remember thinking maybe it was a drone. That was the first thing that made sense. Someone flying one out late, for whatever reason. But it didn't blink. No red or green lights. Just that hard white reflection, like bare metal catching the beam. I took my foot off the accelerator and let the car roll. The thing stayed in the same spot relative to me, which didn't make sense if I was moving toward it. It should have gotten bigger or shifted. Instead, it just hung there. I slowed down more, almost to a crawl. That's when I realized I couldn't hear anything else. No wind, no distant cars. Even the usual noise of tires on wet road felt muted, like it was being dampened. I cracked my window a little. Nothing. No night sounds, no breeze, nothing at all. Just the faint hum of my engine. I remember getting this weird feeling in my chest. Not panic, just a kind of tension. The reflection flickered slightly, not like a light turning on and off, more like it tilted a fraction, catching the beam at a different angle. And I could finally see a shape around it. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a backpack if I had to guess. Smooth edges, no visible details, just a darker outline against the sky. It didn't look like a drone. Too still, too clean. I stopped the car completely. Engine still running, headlights pointed straight at it. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then it tilted. That's the part that stuck with me. It didn't rotate like something spinning or adjusting normally. It just shifted angle in a way that felt wrong, like it skipped the in-between movement. 1 second it was facing me, reflecting the headlights. The next, it was angled slightly upward. No gradual motion. Just there, then there. The reflection disappeared instantly once it turned. Now I could barely see it at all. Just a faint darker patch against the sky. I leaned forward over the wheel, trying to keep my eyes on it. My ears started popping like pressure building. I swallowed a couple times, but it didn't help. The car's dashboard lights seemed dimmer all of a sudden. I actually glanced down to check if something was wrong with the battery. Everything looked normal. When I looked back up, it had moved closer, not by much. Maybe a few feet, but enough that I knew it hadn't been my eyes playing tricks. Still no sound. I felt that tension spike a little. My hands tightened on the wheel. I thought about just driving off, but I didn't want to take my eyes off it, so I just sat there. The thing tilted again, same kind of movement. No transition, just a sudden change in angle, and then it shot upward. There was no build-up, no acceleration I could see. It didn't speed up like a normal object would. It was just there, and then it was higher, way higher, almost instantly. My eyes struggled to track it. Within maybe a second, it was just a faint dot, then gone. The silence snapped back all at once. I heard the wind again, distant noise from somewhere, the normal sound of my tires on the road as I shifted slightly in the seat. My ears popped hard, like pressure releasing. I sat there for a bit, just staring at where it had gone. The sky looked completely normal. No lights, no movement. I checked the time on the dashboard. 2:18. That didn't make sense. I'd left my sister's around 1:10. The drive should have taken maybe 30 minutes. Even with slowing down, there was no way I'd been out there over an hour. I looked back at the road behind me, empty. No cars had passed me that whole time. Not in front, not behind. I don't know why, but that bothered me more than anything else. I put the car in gear and started driving again. For the next few minutes, everything felt slightly off. The headlights didn't seem to reach as far as they should. The road looked flatter, like depth wasn't quite right. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see something behind me. Nothing. After maybe 10 minutes, things started to feel normal again. I passed a car coming the other way. Its headlights looked too bright for a second, then fine. I made it back into town without anything else happening. When I got home, I sat in the car for a while before going inside. I checked the front of the car, not really sure why. There was a faint streak across the hood, like something had dragged lightly over it. Not a scratch, just a slightly different texture in the paint. I tried wiping it with my hand, but it didn't change. It was directly in line with where my headlights would have hit that thing in the air. I went inside and checked my phone. No missed calls, no messages. The time matched the dashboard. Later that day, I drove the same route again, just to see if I could make sense of the timing. It took exactly 32 minutes. No traffic, no delays. I kept an eye on that stretch of road when I passed it. Nothing there. But I noticed something I hadn't before. There were reflector posts all along that section, evenly spaced, except for one gap, right about where I'd stopped the night before. There was a stretch with no reflectors at all, like one or two were just missing. I slowed down as I passed it, looking out into the field. There was nothing there, just wet grass and a low fence. But for a second, I thought I saw something shift in the air above it, not a shape, not a light, just a slight distortion, like heat haze. Then it was gone. I noticed it because my shadow didn't match where I was. I was walking home from a late shift, cutting through a row of terraced streets I'd taken 100 times before. It was just after 11, dry but cold, that kind of sharp air where your breath shows in short bursts. Streetlights were on, spaced out like usual, leaving patches of shadow between them. Nothing out of the ordinary. I had my hands in my pockets, head down, just focused on getting back. There wasn't anyone else around, which wasn't unusual for that time. I stepped under one of the streetlights, and that's when I saw it. My shadow stretched out in front of me like it should have, but it went too far. At first, I didn't really process it. I just kept walking. Then something about it clicked, and I slowed down. The shadow was longer than it should have been for the angle of the light. I stopped. The shadow kept going, just for a second longer than my movement. Then it snapped back to where it should have been. I stood there, looking down at it. It looked normal again. I shifted my weight, lifted one foot slightly, just testing. The shadow moved exactly how it should. I let out a small breath, half laughing to myself. Figured it was just my eyes adjusting or something weird with the light. I kept walking. A few steps later, I passed out of the streetlight and into one of the darker patches. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. No distant cars, no wind, nothing. Even my footsteps sounded off, like they were too contained, not echoing the way they normally would between the houses. I slowed down again. There was another streetlight ahead, maybe 20 meters away. I walked toward it, keeping my eyes on the ground this time. As I stepped into the edge of the light, my shadow appeared again. Normal at first. Then it stretched. Longer than before. It slid across the pavement, extending past where it should have ended, thinning out unnaturally as it went. I froze. The shadow kept extending for a fraction of a second longer. Then it snapped back, same as before. Quick, almost like a rubber band. I felt this tightness in my chest. I looked up at the streetlight. It looked normal, same dull yellow glow, nothing flickering. I glanced around. The street was empty, no movement in any of the windows, no cars passing. I looked back down. The shadow was normal again. I took a step forward. It moved correctly. Another step. Still normal. I hesitated, then kept going. The next stretch between lights felt longer than usual. The darkness seemed thicker. I couldn't see my shadow at all now, just my feet moving across the pavement. That's when I felt the pressure in my ears. It came on suddenly, like a quick shift. I swallowed, expecting it to clear, but it stayed. Not painful, just noticeable. I stopped walking. The pressure held steady. I looked up instinctively. At first, I didn't see anything, just the dark sky, a few faint clouds, drifting. Then I noticed a faint light. It was directly above the street, barely visible. Not bright, not glowing strongly, just a soft, pale presence. It didn't look like a star. Too low, and the color was off. It wasn't moving like anything I recognized either. It just lingered. I stared at it, trying to focus. The edges of it weren't clear. It was more like a dim patch where the sky looked slightly lighter. The pressure in my ears increased. I felt it spread slightly into my jaw, a dull tension. I took a step backward without really thinking. The light above seemed to shift. Not quickly, just enough that it stayed centered above me. My stomach dropped. I took another step back. Same thing. It adjusted again. I turned around. The next streetlight was behind me, casting a faint glow over the pavement. I walked toward it, faster now. As I stepped back into the light, my shadow appeared again, and stretched, longer than before. It shot out in front of me, thin and distorted, reaching almost to the next patch of darkness. I stopped abruptly. The shadow held that unnatural length for a split second, then snapped back. At the same time, the faint light above dimmed slightly. I could feel that pressure peak, like something tightening around my head. I forced myself to keep moving, step by step, staying in the light as much as I could. Each time I passed under a streetlight, the same thing happened. The shadow stretched too far, held, then snapped back, and each time the light above faded just a little more. By the third light, I was breathing faster. The street felt wrong. The houses looked the same, but the spaces between them felt wider somehow, like everything had shifted slightly out of alignment. I didn't look up again. I just focused on the ground and kept walking. The pressure in my ears started to ease. The shadows began to behave normally again. Short, consistent, nothing stretched or delayed. I risked a glance upward. The faint light was almost gone, just a barely noticeable patch now. As I reached the corner near my house, it disappeared completely. The pressure dropped all at once. The normal sounds came back. A car in the distance, a dog barking somewhere, the faint hum of something electrical. I stopped at the end of my street and looked back. Everything looked normal. Streetlights, pavement, houses, no strange light, no stretched shadows. I walked the rest of the way home without anything else happening. When I got inside, I stood by the front door for a minute, just listening. Everything sounded right. I went into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and 12:26. That didn't make sense. I'd left work at 11:10. The walk should have taken maybe 20 minutes. I stood there trying to work it out. It didn't add up. I went upstairs, still thinking about it, and stopped by the window. From there, I could see part of the street I just walked down. The streetlights were steady, nothing unusual. I turned away, about to go to bed. Then something caught my eye in the reflection of the glass. My shadow, cast by the hallway light behind me. It stretched along the wall, and for just a second it extended a little too far, then snapped back. I was just sitting there with the engine off, waiting for the rain to ease up. It had been coming down hard for about 20 minutes, proper heavy rain, the kind that blurs everything past the windshield. I'd pulled into a small lay-by off a country road, just outside a village called Marston. No streetlights, just hedges and a field on the other side. I didn't feel like driving through it, so I killed the engine and waited. The car went quiet straight away, just the sound of rain hitting the roof and the occasional drip from the trees above. I leaned back in the seat, phone in my hand, but there was no signal out there, so I just kind of sat and listened. After a few minutes, the rain started to ease. Not stopping, just slowing enough that I could see a bit further out through the glass. That's when I noticed how dark it was. Not just normal night dark. It felt thicker, like the sky wasn't reflecting anything back. Usually you get some glow from nearby towns or even just the clouds catching light, but this was just flat black. I remember thinking it looked deeper than it should. I shifted in the seat, adjusting my jacket, and that's when I felt it. A quick vibration. Not the car starting or anything mechanical. More like a short buzz through the seat, like when your phone vibrates on a hard surface, but deeper. It lasted maybe a second. I sat still, waiting to see if it would happen again. Nothing. I checked my phone, thinking maybe I'd imagined it or it had buzzed without me noticing. No notifications. I leaned forward slightly, listening. The rain had almost stopped now, just a light patter. Then I saw it, in the rearview mirror, a faint glow. It wasn't bright. It didn't light up the car or anything. Just a soft, pale kind of light sitting in the center of the mirror. At first I thought it was headlights from another car pulling up behind me. But there was no shape to it, no beams, no defined source, just that glow hovering in the reflection. I turned around in my seat, nothing there. The lay-by behind me was empty, just wet tarmac and the hedge line. I turned back to the mirror. The glow was still there, exactly the same. That's when I felt that slight tension in my chest. I reached up and adjusted the mirror a little, thinking maybe it was catching something at an odd angle. The glow stayed centered. It didn't shift with the mirror like it should have. I paused, hands still on it. Then I tilted it further. Same thing. The angle changed, but the glow stayed fixed in the middle. That didn't make sense. I slowly lowered my hand. The glow flickered slightly. Not like a light going out, more like it wavered for a second, then steadied again. I leaned closer to the mirror. The surface looked normal. No distortion, no marks, just that faint light sitting there. Then the seat vibrated again. Stronger this time. A low, steady buzz that lasted a bit longer, maybe 2 or 3 seconds. I felt it up through my back, into my shoulders. At the same time, the glow in the mirror brightened slightly. Still soft, but more noticeable now. I froze. My ears started to feel off, like pressure building. I swallowed, but it didn't clear. The air inside the car felt different, not colder, not warmer, just still. Like everything had paused. I glanced out the side window. The rain had completely stopped. No wind, no movement in the trees. Everything just sat there. I looked back at the mirror. The glow had spread slightly, not larger exactly, but less focused. And around it, I thought I saw something else. A shape. Not solid, not defined. More like the space around the light was bending, like heat haze. It shifted slightly. I blinked, trying to focus. It didn't go away. The vibration came back again. This time, it wasn't just the seat. I could feel it through the steering wheel, faintly in my hands. The dashboard lights dimmed for a second, then returned to normal. I reached for the keys without really thinking. The moment my hand touched them, the glow in the mirror flickered harder, then steadied again. I hesitated. Something about the way it reacted made me stop. I slowly pulled my hand back. The glow settled. The vibration eased slightly. I didn't like that. I tried the door handle instead, thinking I'd just step out and check behind the car properly. The moment I touched it, the pressure in my ears spiked, sharp enough to make me wince. I let go immediately. The pressure dropped again, I stayed very still after that, just breathing, watching the mirror. The glow didn't move, it just stayed there, faint and steady. Time felt strange. I don't know how long I sat like that. Could have been a minute, could have been longer. Then slowly, the glow started to fade. Not all at once. It dimmed gradually, like it was pulling away. The distortion around it smoothed out, the vibration faded with it, the pressure in my ears eased, and then it was gone. Just the normal reflection of the back window. I didn't move for a few seconds. Then the sounds came back. A distant car somewhere on the road. Wind moving through the trees, a drip from the hedge. Everything felt normal again. I grabbed the keys and started the engine. It turned over without any issue. Headlights came on, illuminating the lay-by behind me. Nothing there. I put the car in gear and pulled out, not really thinking about it. As I drove, everything seemed fine. The road looked normal. The sky looked normal. But something felt off. The headlights didn't seem to reach as far as they should. The edges of the road felt harder to judge. I checked the time on the dashboard. 1:03. That didn't line up. I'd pulled into the lay-by just after midnight. There was no way I'd been sitting there that long. I kept driving, not stopping until I got back into town. Streetlights, other cars, everything familiar. When I got home, I sat in the car for a bit before getting out. I looked at the rearview mirror again. Just normal. No glow. I reached up and adjusted it. It moved like it should. No resistance, no weird behavior. Later, when I went to grab something from the back seat, I noticed something odd. The fabric on the seat where I'd been sitting felt slightly warm. Not hot, just warmer than it should have been, like something had been pressing against it for a while. I left it alone. The next morning, I checked the car again. Everything seemed fine. No marks, no damage. But when I sat down and closed the door for just a second, I felt that same faint vibration through the seat. It stopped almost immediately. And when I checked the mirror, there was nothing there. I only checked the camera because of what Liam said. He caught me outside around midday while I was taking the bins out. Just casual, nothing weird about it at first. "Everything all right at yours last night?" he asked. I thought he meant noise or something. "Yeah, why?" He hesitated, like he was deciding how to say it. "I got back late, around 1. Thought I saw lights over your place." I laughed a little. "What, like a drone?" "Maybe," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Just hovering. Didn't make any noise." That's when it stuck with me. I have a small security camera above the front door. Nothing fancy, just one of those cheap ones that records overnight and saves clips if it detects motion. "Probably just picked it up," I said. "I'll check it later." He nodded, but before he walked off, he added, "It wasn't just one light. There were a few." That part stayed with me. I didn't think much of it at first. Stuff like that happens all the time. People missy things at night, especially if they're tired. Still, when I got back inside, I pulled up the footage. It showed the front of my house, part of the driveway, and a bit of the street. Nothing out of the ordinary. A couple cars passing earlier in the evening, a cat around midnight. I scrolled to around 1. That's when it got strange. There was a gap. Not a missing clip exactly, but the timeline skipped forward by about 10 minutes. I figured maybe nothing triggered the motion detection, which happens sometimes. Then I noticed a clip right at the edge of that gap. It was only a few seconds long. I opened it. At first, it looked normal. The driveway, the street, everything still. Then the image flickered. Not like a glitch from bad signal, more like the brightness shifted unevenly across the frame. And for a split second, I thought I saw something above the roofline. I replayed it. Same thing. A brief flicker, then a distortion across the image, like parts of the frame were misaligned. And in that moment, there was a faint light, not bright, just a soft glow at the top of the frame, barely visible. Then it cut. That was it. No other clips around that time. I checked the rest of the footage, going back an hour, then forward another hour. Nothing else unusual. I stood there for a bit, watching that same clip over and over. It didn't make sense. If something had triggered the camera, there should have been more footage. I went outside to look around just to see if anything looked off. Everything was normal. No marks on the driveway, no damage, nothing out of place. I looked up at the roof. Nothing there either. That should have been the end of it. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what Liam said. Multiple lights. hovering. I kept replaying that clip in my head. Around midnight, I went to bed. At some point, I woke up. I didn't check the time right away, but it was still dark. The house felt quiet. Not just normal quiet, more like everything had been muted. I lay there for a second, listening. No fridge hum, no faint noise from outside, nothing. That's when I noticed the pressure in my ears. It came on gradually, like something building. I swallowed, but it didn't clear. I sat up. The room felt still, too still. I got out of bed and walked to the window. I didn't open the curtains at first, just stood there listening. Then I pulled them back slightly. The street was empty. No cars, no movement, and the sky looked wrong, not dark in the usual way. There was a faint glow above the house, not a defined light source, just a soft brightness that didn't match anything I recognized. I stared at it, trying to make sense of it. It didn't move, it just hung there. The pressure in my ears increased. I felt it in my jaw, my temples. I stepped back from the window. The moment I did, the glow dimmed slightly. I paused, then stepped forward again. It brightened, not by much, but enough to notice. My chest tightened. I stepped back again. The glow faded. That's when I realized something. It was reacting. Not dramatically, not in a way that was obvious unless you were paying attention, but it changed depending on where I stood. I didn't like that. I moved away from the window completely. The pressure eased a little. I stood there, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to go outside, like to see it properly, but something about the way it behaved kept me from doing it. Instead, I just stayed inside. After a minute or two, the pressure started to drop. The faint hum of the fridge came back. Normal sounds returned. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, I checked the camera again. There was another clip. Same time frame. I opened it. It looked worse than the first one. The image was heavily distorted, like the data had been corrupted. Blocks of the frame were missing or smeared. But in the middle of it, there was a brief moment where the distortion cleared just enough, and I saw it. Not clearly. Just a cluster of faint lights above the house. They weren't arranged in any pattern I could make sense of. They hovered there for a second. Then the image broke apart again. The clip ended. I checked the rest of the footage. No other clips, no motion alerts. Just that. I went outside again, standing in the same spot as the camera's view. Everything looked normal. Liam came out later that day. "Did you check it?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Camera picked up something. Just weird footage." He nodded slowly. "I saw it for a few minutes," he said. "Just sitting there." Then it went. "How many lights?" I asked. He thought about it. "3," he said. "Maybe 4. Hard to tell." I didn't tell him about the way it reacted when I moved. I didn't tell him about the pressure in my ears. That night I left the camera running again. Nothing showed up. No glitches, no missing time, everything normal. But when I reviewed the footage the next morning, I noticed something small. Right before midnight, there was a single frame where the image flickered. Just one frame. And in that frame, for a split second, the sky above the house was brighter than it should have been. No clear shapes, no defined lights, just a faint, uneven glow. Then it was gone. I noticed the headlights fading before I noticed anything in the road. It was close to 1 a.m., and I was driving back from a job in a small town about 40 minutes outside Reno. I work HVC, so late calls happen when someone's heat cuts out, especially in colder months. That night had been clear but cold, and the desert air felt sharp even through the windshield. The road I was on cuts through open land for miles. No streetlights, no buildings, just stretches of scrub and low hills on either side. I'd driven it plenty of times and knew every bend. My headlights usually throw pretty far out there. You can see the road ahead clearly for a couple 100 feet, especially with high beams on. That's why it stood out immediately when the light shortened. At first I thought I'd accidentally hit the low beams. The road ahead looked dimmer, like the reach of the headlights had been cut in half. I flicked the high beams off and back on again. No change. The light still didn't reach as far as it should. I frowned and leaned forward slightly, peering through the windshield. The road ahead looked muted. Not dark exactly, just like the light was being absorbed before it got very far. I checked the dashboard. No warning lights. The car sounded normal. I eased off the gas a little. That's when I saw it. A faint glow hanging over the road ahead. It wasn't bright. more like a pale haze, just slightly lighter than the darkness around it. It hovered maybe 50 or 60 feet in front of the car, right in the middle of the lane. For a second, I thought it might be fog, but there hadn't been any fog anywhere else on the drive. The air had been clear. I rolled down the window a crack. Cold air rushed in. No moisture, no mist. The glow stayed in place. My headlights seemed to stop when they reached it, like the beams just ended at its edge. I slowed down more. The tires hummed softly against the asphalt. The glow didn't move. It didn't grow brighter as I got closer. Just stayed there, faint and steady. I felt a strange hesitation about driving into it. Not fear exactly, just a sense that something about it wasn't right. I tapped the brake and brought the car down to a near crawl. The glow remained suspended over the road. It didn't cast shadows, didn't reflect off the pavement the way normal light does. It just existed. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The road behind me was dark and empty. When I looked forward again, the glow seemed slightly larger, or maybe I was just closer to it. I couldn't tell. The edges of it were soft, blending into the darkness around it. I tried to see through it, to make out the road beyond, but there was nothing, just darkness, like the headlights couldn't penetrate it. I eased the car forward another few feet. The glow stayed in place. Then something else happened. The light shifted slightly, not away from me, up. Just a small movement, like it lifted a few feet higher above the road. I froze with my foot hovering over the brake. The engine idled quietly. The glow held its new position. I waited for some kind of sound, wind, an engine, anything. There was nothing, just the faint hum of my car and the cold silence of the desert. Then the glow dimmed, slowly. It didn't disappear all at once, it just faded, becoming thinner and less visible. Within a few seconds, it was gone. My headlights stretched forward again, illuminating the road like normal. The asphalt, the painted center line, the gravel shoulder, all visible again. I sat there for a moment, not moving. Then I eased the car forward. As I drove through the spot where the glow had been, I expected to feel something. A temperature change, a shift in the air. But there was nothing. The car passed through empty space. I kept driving, gradually picking up speed again. The rest of the road looked normal. The hills on either side passed by in the dark. The stars above were steady. About a mile later, I noticed something else. The radio had gone quiet. I hadn't even realized when it stopped. I reached over and turned the volume knob. Nothing. No static. No sound at all. I pressed the power button. The screen stayed on, but no audio came through. After a few seconds, the sound returned suddenly, mid-sentence from whatever program had been playing. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 1:12 a.m. That made me frown. I was pretty sure it had been closer to 1:05 when I first noticed the headlights fading. The stretch of road I'd just driven shouldn't have taken that long, but I couldn't clearly remember the last few minutes, just the glow, the way the light had stopped in front of me. I drove the rest of the way home without seeing anything else. When I pulled into my driveway and shut off the engine, the headlights lingered for a second before going out. In that brief moment before they faded, I thought I saw something faint ahead of the car. Not a glow, just a darker patch in the air. Then the lights shut off, and it was gone. I noticed the silence before I noticed anything else. It wasn't gradual. That's what stuck with me. 1 second there were sounds, crickets, leaves shifting, something moving far off in the trees, and the next second it was all gone. Just gone. I was camping alone in a stretch of forest about an hour outside of Bend. Not a campground, just a spot I'd used a few times before. Small clearing, fire pit, enough space to park my car and set up a tent. My name's Evan. It was late, probably close to 1 a.m. I'd let the fire burn down to embers and was sitting in a folding chair, just staring into it. The night had been normal up until then. Cool air, light breeze, the usual constant noise of the woods. Then everything cut out. At first, I didn't even register it as something strange. But after a second, it hit me. There was no sound at all, no insects, no wind, nothing moving. Even the fire sounded quieter. I sat there, not moving, listening. The silence felt heavy, like it was pressing in from all sides. I looked around the clearing. The trees stood still, dark shapes against a darker sky. No movement, no indication of anything unusual. But the absence of sound was wrong. It wasn't natural. Even in the quietest places, there's always something. A distant rustle, a faint hum, something. This was nothing. I stood up slowly, the legs of the chair scraping softly against the ground. The sound felt too loud, out of place. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the tree line. Nothing, just stillness. I took a step toward the edge of the clearing. The ground crunched lightly under my boot. Still no other sound, no response from the forest. That's when I noticed the air felt different. Not colder, not warmer, just off. Like the pressure had shifted slightly, I swallowed, trying to clear my ears. They didn't pop, but something felt wrong about the space around me. I took another step, then stopped. Something moved, not in a way I could track, just a shift between the trees. A faint shimmer. That's the only way I can describe it, like heat distortion, but softer, and out of place in the cool night air. It passed between two trees about 20 feet away, low to the ground. Moving smoothly, I froze. My breath caught without me meaning it to. The shimmer didn't make a sound, didn't disturb anything. It just moved, a subtle distortion against the darkness. I tried to focus on it, that the moment I did, it became harder to see, like it didn't want to be looked at directly. I shifted my gaze slightly, watching it from the edge of my vision. That made it clearer. It continued moving, gliding between the trees. No change in speed, no hesitation, just a steady, controlled motion. I felt that tightness in my chest again. The same instinctive reaction to something not making sense. I didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. The shimmer reached the edge of the clearing. Paused, just for a second. Then it faded, not disappearing instantly, just thinning out, losing definition, until there was nothing left. The space between the trees looked normal again. Dark. Still. I stood there, waiting. The silence held for another few seconds. Then, all at once, the sounds came back. Crickets, leaves shifting, a distant branch snapping somewhere far off. The normal noise of the forest, like someone had flipped a switch. I let out a breath slowly. I hadn't realized I'd been holding it. I looked around again. Everything seemed normal. The trees, the clearing, the fire, now just glowing coals. I walked back to the chair and sat down. The fabric creaked under me. That sound felt normal again, grounded. I stared into the fire, trying to process what I'd just seen, or thought I'd seen. I told myself it could have been my eyes adjusting, or something with the light, but that didn't explain the silence. I checked my phone, 1:07 a.m. That seemed off. I could have sworn it had been closer to 12:50 before everything went quiet. It hadn't felt like nearly 20 minutes, more like 5. I sat there for a while longer. The forest stayed normal. No more silence. No more movement. Eventually, I decided to turn in. I put out the fire completely and zipped myself into the tent. The fabric rustled as I moved. The sound felt reassuring. I lay on my back, staring up at the faint outline of the tent ceiling, listening. Everything sounded normal outside. Insects, wind, distant movement. I closed my eyes. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because when I opened them again, it was still dark and quiet. Not completely silent, but quieter than before. I lay there, not moving, listening. Then I saw it again through the thin fabric of the tent, a faint distortion, sliding across the outside surface, slow, smooth, like something passing just inches away. I held my breath. The shape moved from one side of the tent to the other, not casting a shadow, not reflecting light, just altering the way the darkness looked. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. The shimmer paused near the front of the tent, right where the zipper was. Then it faded again, leaving the fabric still, normal. I stayed there for a long time, listening. Nothing else happened. Eventually, the normal sounds of the forest filled back in, and I lay there, eyes open, until the first hint of morning light started to show through the trees. When I finally got up and stepped outside, everything looked the same as it always did. But just beyond the edge of the clearing, between two trees, there was a narrow patch of ground where the leaves looked slightly disturbed. Not crushed, not broken, just shifted in a straight line. I noticed the recording before I even realized I'd been asleep. My phone was warm in my hand like I'd been holding it for a while. The screen was still on, showing the voice memo app with a timer that had stopped at 2:48. I didn't remember opening it. I sat there for a second, still half out of it, trying to piece together what I'd been doing. The room was dim. Early morning light coming through the blinds, just enough to see shapes. My alarm hadn't gone off yet. I checked the time. 6:12 a.m. I stared at the recording on the screen. 2 minutes, 48 seconds. No title, just the default timestamp from when it started. I tried to remember if I'd woken up in the night for some reason. Maybe I'd heard something and started recording it without fully waking up. But nothing came back. No memory of it. I tapped play. At first there was nothing. Just a faint hiss like background noise. Then the tone started. Low, steady. Not loud, but clear enough that it cut through the silence. It wasn't a single note, more like a pulse. A soft, repeating thrum. Not mechanical exactly, not musical either. Just a consistent, rhythmic sound. I held the phone closer to my ear. The tone repeated every couple seconds. Same length, same spacing. No variation. I sat there, listening to the whole thing. Nothing else in the recording, no movement, no voices, just that sound. When it ended, the silence felt heavier than before. I replayed it. Same thing, that same low, pulsing tone. I glanced around the room. Everything looked normal. My bedroom door was closed. The window was shut, nothing out of place. I got out of bed and checked the rest of the apartment. Kitchen, living room, bathroom, nothing. No source for the sound. I went back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the recording again. This time, I noticed something else. There was a slight distortion at the edges of each pulse, like the sound was too low for the phone to capture cleanly, or like it wasn't entirely within the range it was supposed to pick up. I frowned and scrubbed through the recording. Near the middle, the tone seemed to dip for a moment, not in volume, in presence, like it had moved slightly farther away. Then it returned to normal. I checked the timestamp, 2:13 a.m. That didn't help. I tried to remember what I'd been doing before bed. Nothing unusual. Watched a show, brushed my teeth, set my alarm, put the phone on the nightstand. That was it. I didn't have any reason to record anything. I looked at the phone again. The battery was lower than it should have been. Not drastically, but enough that it stood out. I checked the usage. The voice memo app had been active during the time the recording was made. Nothing else. I stood up and walked over to the window, pulled the blinds up slightly. Morning light spilled in. The street outside looked normal. A car passed by, a couple people walking their dog. Everything felt ordinary. I let the blinds fall back into place. Then I noticed something else. The air in the room felt different, subtle, but noticeable, like the pressure had changed. I swallowed, trying to clear my ears. They popped slightly. I stood there for a second, focusing on it. Then it went back to normal. I sat down again and played the recording one more time. This time, I held the phone away from me, listening to how the sound filled the room. The tone felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more weight than a simple recording. At the very end, just before it cut off, there was something new, a faint shift. Not a second sound, just a slight change in the tone, like it had adjusted. I replayed just that part, over and over. It was subtle, easy to miss, but it was there. I set the phone down on the bed, sat there for a while, trying to decide what to do with it. Eventually, I saved the recording, gave it a name, then left it. The rest of the day went normally. Work, errands, nothing out of the ordinary. But the recording stayed in the back of my mind. That night, I went to bed a little earlier, left my phone on the nightstand again, face down this time. I remember checking it one last time before turning off the light. Everything was normal. No apps open, no recording running. I fell asleep pretty quickly. Sometime during the night, I woke up. I didn't know why. The room was dark, completely still. I lay there, not moving, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I felt it, not heard, felt. A low vibration, faint, steady, coming from somewhere close. I held my breath, listened. Nothing. No sound. Just that sensation. It faded after a few seconds. I stayed awake for a while longer, then eventually drifted off again. When I woke up in the morning, the first thing I did was grab my phone. The screen lit up. The voice memo app was open again. Another recording. This one was longer. 5 minutes. 2 seconds. I didn't press play right away. I just sat there holding the phone, staring at it. Then I looked at the timestamp, 2:48 a.m., the exact time the first recording had ended. I saw the light before I realized how wrong it looked. I was driving home from my sister's place, out past the edge of town where the road cuts between open farmland for miles. It was late, close to 11, and completely dark, except for my headlights and the occasional distant farmhouse light way off in the distance. My name's Aaron. I'd taken that road plenty of times. That night was clear, no clouds, just a flat black sky and rows of crops on both sides. Corn mostly, tall enough that you couldn't see far into the fields. I was maybe 10 minutes from home when I noticed something off to my right. At first, I thought it was a porch light from a house set back in the field, but it wasn't in the right place. It was too low and too far from any structure. It hovered just above the tops of the crops. A soft white glow, not bright, more like a dull, steady light. I slowed down a little, trying to get a better look. The glow didn't move. It just stayed there, hanging over the field. I checked the road ahead, then glanced back at it. Still there. Same height, same brightness, no flicker, no beam, just a shape of light. I rolled down my window a bit. The night air came in, cool and still, no sound, no hum, nothing. I slowed down more, almost to a crawl. The light didn't react, didn't shift, didn't change intensity. It just stayed fixed in place. I tried to make sense of it, maybe a piece of equipment in the field, some kind of marker light, but it didn't illuminate anything around it. The crops directly beneath it were still dark. That's what made me notice something was off. If it was a normal light, it should have cast something. A glow, a shadow, anything. But the field looked exactly the same under it. I pulled the car onto the shoulder. Gravel crunched under the tires. I left the engine running. The headlights pointed down the road, leaving the field mostly in darkness except for that one spot. I leaned slightly toward the passenger side, trying to get a clearer view. The glow hovered maybe 10, 15 feet above the crops. Perfectly still. No sway, no drift. I turned off the headlights. The road ahead went dark. The only light left was that one glow in the field. It didn't get any brighter without the headlights. Didn't seem affected at all. I opened the door and stepped out. The night felt heavier outside the car, quiet in a way that made every small movement stand out. I stood there watching it, trying to understand what I was looking at. It didn't look like a bulb or a flame or anything I recognized, just a soft, round presence of light. I took a step away from the car. The gravel shifted under my shoe. The sound felt too loud. The light didn't move. I took another step. Still nothing. No reaction. I felt that tightness in my chest start to build. Not panic, just that sense that something wasn't right. I stopped walking, stood there, staring. Then the light changed. It didn't flicker, didn't brighten. It just started to move, upward, straight up. No curve, no tilt, just rising, slow at first, then a little faster, still completely silent. I felt my body tense. The way it moved didn't look natural. No wobble, no adjustment, just a smooth, controlled lift. I took a step back without thinking. The light kept rising. It didn't cast anything on the ground, didn't change the look of the crops below it. It was like it existed separate from everything around it. Within a few seconds, it was above the height of the field, then higher, above where a tree line would be if there were trees. I kept watching, my eyes tracking it against the sky. It didn't get smaller as fast as I expected, which made me realize it was probably farther away than it looked, or bigger. I couldn't tell. It kept going. Straight up, no sound, no trail, no change in brightness. Then, just as it reached a point where it blended into the stars, it disappeared. Not faded, not dimmed, just gone. 1 second it was there, the next, nothing. I stood there, staring at the empty space, waiting for it to come back. Nothing did. The sky looked normal again. Stars scattered evenly, no movement. I stayed there longer than I meant to, trying to convince myself I'd misread it, that it was something normal I just didn't recognize. But the way it had risen, I couldn't explain that. Eventually I got back in the car, closed the door. The inside felt smaller than before, quieter. I turned the headlights back on. The road lit up again. The field to my right looked completely normal. Dark. Still, no sign of anything. I pulled back onto the road and started driving. For a while, I kept checking the side mirror, then the sky, then back to the road. Nothing. Everything stayed normal. About 5 minutes later, I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 11:42. That made me frown. I was sure it had been closer to 11:20 when I first saw the light. It hadn't felt like 20 minutes, more like 5. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a second before turning off the engine. The house was dark, quiet, normal. I got out, locked the car, and walked inside. But before I closed the door, I looked back down the street. Just for a second, everything was still. But way out past the last streetlight in the direction of the fields, I thought I saw something faint. Not bright enough to be sure, just a pale suggestion of light, hovering low, exactly where I'd seen it before. I first noticed the humming when I crossed the second block. It was late, close to 1 a.m., and I'd gone out for a walk because I couldn't sleep. I live in a quiet suburb outside Boise, the kind of place where everything shuts down early and the streets are empty by midnight. My name's Daniel. I walk a lot at night when my head won't settle. That night was cold but clear, no wind. Just that still kind of quiet where your footsteps sound louder than they should. I had my hands in my jacket pockets, hood up, just walking with no real direction. At first, I thought the humming was coming from a house. It was faint, low, more like something you felt than heard. I kept walking. The sound stayed with me. Not louder, not quieter, just there. I slowed down a little, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It didn't seem directional. Usually you can tell if a sound is coming from your left or right, ahead or behind. This wasn't like that. It felt centered, like it was around me instead of somewhere else. I stopped walking. The humming stopped immediately. I stood still for a second, listening. Nothing. Just the normal silence of the street. I took a step forward. The humming came back. Same volume, same tone. That made me pause. I took another step. Still there. I stopped again. Silence. I frowned, looking around. The houses were dark, no lights on, no cars moving, no obvious source. I turned slowly in a circle. Nothing changed. I took a few steps backward. The humming came back again, exactly the same. I stopped. It stopped. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Then I kept walking, a little slower now, paying attention. The humming followed, not in a way that suggested movement behind me or above me. It didn't get closer or farther. It just stayed consistent, like it was locked to my pace. I tried walking faster. The sound didn't change. Still the same low, steady tone. I slowed down again. Still there. I stopped abruptly. The silence hit instantly. No fade, no delay, just gone. I felt that tight, uneasy feeling settle in my chest. I looked up. The sky was clear, stars scattered across it. Nothing unusual. I looked back down the street, still empty. I kept going, but now I was paying attention to everything. The sound of my shoes on the pavement, my breathing, the faint hum of distant power lines, but this humming was different. It wasn't part of the environment. It was attached. That's the only way I can describe it. I turned onto a side street that runs along a small park. There's a stretch there with no streetlights for about half a block. It gets darker than the rest of the neighborhood. I hesitated for a second, then kept walking. As soon as I stepped into the darker stretch, the humming changed slightly. Not in pitch, in presence. It felt stronger, not louder exactly, just more noticeable, like it was pressing in closer. I slowed my pace. The sound stayed with me. I stopped. Silence. I took a single step forward. The humming returned instantly. I looked around again. The park to my right was just a dark mass of trees, no movement, no light. I took another step, then another. The sound didn't shift, didn't move, just stayed constant. I started to feel like I was being matched, not followed, matched. I stopped again. The silence felt heavier this time, like something had been there and suddenly wasn't. I took a breath and turned around, started walking back the way I came. The humming came back, same as before, perfectly synced to my movement. I tested it, short steps, long steps, it didn't matter. The sound was there as long as I was moving, gone the second I stopped. I picked up at my pace, walking faster now. The sound stayed with me. I crossed back under a streetlight. The orange glow spread across the pavement. My shadow stretched out in front of me. For a second, I thought the humming dipped, not stopped, just softened. Then it returned to normal. I kept walking, almost at a jog now. The sound didn't lag, didn't fall behind, didn't get ahead. It stayed perfectly in sync. I reached the corner near my house, stopped. Silence. I stood there, breathing a little heavier, looking around. Everything looked normal. The same houses, the same quiet street. I took one step forward. The humming came back, right away. That's when it really hit me. It wasn't following me. It wasn't coming from somewhere else. It was reacting to me. I walked the last half block to my house quickly. The sound stayed with me the entire time. I reached my driveway, stopped. Silence. I stood there for a second, staring at the front door. Then I took a step toward it. The humming came back. I unlocked the door. Stepped inside. closed it behind me. The sound stopped, completely. I stood there in the entryway, not moving, listening. Nothing. Just the quiet of the house. I took a step forward, still nothing. I walked into the living room. No humming. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Everything felt normal again, but something about it stuck with me. I walked over to the window and looked outside. The street was empty, still, quiet. I stared for a minute. Then I unlocked the door again, opened it just a few inches. The cold air slipped in. I stepped 1 foot outside. The humming came back immediately. Same tone, same intensity. I froze, then pulled my foot back inside. Silence. I closed the door, locked it. Stood there for a long time just staring at it. Eventually, I went to bed. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, everything felt normal. No sound, no weirdness. But later that day, when I stepped out to get the mail, I paused on the porch, just for a second, listening. There was nothing at first. Then, as I shifted my weight forward to take a step, I felt it, not heard, felt. A faint vibration in my chest, like something was about to start. I noticed it because everything else was steady. I'd driven out past the last stretch of houses, parked off a dirt road that cuts through some open land outside Flagstaff. It was one of those dry, clear nights where the sky looks packed with stars, not just scattered. My name's Colin. I'd been out there a few times before just to sit and clear my head. It was late, probably around 11:30. Still warm from the day, but cooling off fast. No wind, just quiet. I leaned back against the hood of my car, hands in my pockets, looking up. At first, everything looked normal. Stars everywhere. Some brighter than others, but all steady. Then I noticed one that wasn't. It was faint, not one of the bright ones. Off to the right, just above the tree line, it flickered, not randomly, in a pattern, on, off, even spacing between each one. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus on it. As soon as I did, it stopped, just like that, completely steady. I held my gaze there. Nothing, just a normal star again. I shifted my eyes slightly, looking just past it instead of directly at it. After a few seconds, it started again. On, off, on, off. Same rhythm. I looked directly at it again. It stopped. I felt a small knot form in my chest. I looked away, pretending not to care, letting my eyes drift across the sky. A few seconds later, it started flickering again. This time, I didn't look straight at it. I watched it from the corner of my eye. The pattern stayed consistent, almost mechanical. Not like a plane, not like a satellite, too precise. I tried to count the timing, 1 second on, 1 second off, over and over. I checked the rest of the sky. Nothing else was doing that. Everything else stayed steady. I took a step away from the car, moving out into the open. The gravel crunched under my shoes. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. I kept my eyes off the star, watching it indirectly. The flickering continued. I took another step, then another. The pattern didn't change, still steady, still controlled. I stopped moving. The flickering continued. I glanced directly at it. It stopped immediately. I let out a breath slowly, looked away again, waited. A few seconds passed, then it started again. I felt like I was being tested, not in a direct way, just observed. I shifted my position slightly, turning my body but keeping my head angled away from the star. The flickering continued in my peripheral vision. Then something else changed. The timing shifted, not by much, just enough to notice. Instead of 1 second on, 1 second off, it stretched slightly. Longer pause, then shorter, then back to even. I frowned, trying to track it. The pattern wasn't random, but it wasn't perfectly consistent anymore either. I looked up at the rest of the sky again, everything else still normal. I checked my phone for the time, 11:47. I couldn't tell how long I'd been standing there. Felt longer than that. I put the phone back in my pocket. Then, without meaning to, I looked directly at the star again. It stopped, but this time it didn't just go steady. It dimmed slightly, not disappearing, just less bright. I held my gaze there. It stayed dim. I looked away, waited, nothing. No flicker this time. I shifted my weight, feeling that same tightness in my chest again. I took a few steps backward toward the car. The star stayed dim. I turned slightly, trying to catch it in my peripheral vision again. No change, just a faint, steady point of light. I leaned back against the hood again. The metal was cooler now. I stared at the sky, not focusing on anything in particular. After maybe 30 seconds, I noticed something else. A second star, a little higher up, flickered once. Just once. Then stayed steady. I straightened, watching. Another flicker. then stillness. Gate. I didn't look directly at it. I kept my gaze loose, trying to take in the whole area. Then both of them flickered. Not in sync, but close. A quick pulse from one, then the other. Then nothing. I felt my breathing change, shallower, slower. I tried to keep track of both without focusing on either. A third point farther to the left flickered once, then went still. I swallowed, my throat dry. The pattern wasn't obvious anymore, but it was there. Something was changing. I made the mistake of looking directly at one of them again. It stopped. All of them did. At once. The entire section of sky went completely steady, no flicker anywhere. I held my gaze there, waiting. Nothing, just normal stars. I stood there for a while, not moving. Eventually, I pushed myself off the car and got inside. Closed the door. The sound felt too loud in the quiet. I started the engine. The headlights came on, cutting across the dirt road. I sat there for a second, hands on the wheel. Then I looked up through the windshield. The stars were still there, unchanged, no flickering, no movement. I put the car in reverse and turned around. As I started driving back toward the main road, I kept glancing up. Nothing unusual, just a normal sky. When I reached the paved road, I stopped at the edge for a second. Looked up one last time, everything steady. I pulled onto the road and started heading back toward town. A few minutes later, when I checked the time again, it read 12:26. I frowned. That didn't line up. It hadn't felt like nearly 40 minutes, more like 10. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping, but every so often I caught myself looking up through the windshield again. And once, just once, I thought I saw a faint flicker reflected in the glass, but when I looked up at the sky itself, everything was completely still. I noticed the stars dimming before I understood why. I was driving back from a late job, somewhere between two small towns in central Nebraska, the kind of road where there's nothing for miles except fields and the occasional farmhouse set way back from the highway. It was just after midnight. Clear sky. No moon. Out there, you can see everything. More stars than you expect, stretched across the sky in a way that makes it feel deeper than it should. I had the windows cracked a little, letting in that cool, dry night air. The road ahead was empty, just my headlights cutting through the dark. I wasn't really thinking about anything, just driving. Then something changed. At first, I thought a cloud had passed over. A patch of sky ahead of me looked darker than the rest, but it didn't behave like a cloud. It wasn't soft, it had a shape, a smooth, circular shape. I slowed down slightly, leaning forward without meaning to. The stars in that section weren't gone. They were dimmed, like something was between me and them. Something that wasn't reflecting light, just blocking it. The circle moved, slowly, across the sky. Not fast like a plane, not drifting like a cloud, just a steady glide. I took my foot off the gas. The car slowed, the engine hummed quietly, the shape continued moving. Silent, smooth, the edges were clean. Not perfectly sharp, but defined enough that I could track it easily against the stars. I rolled down the window a little more. Listened. Nothing. No engine noise, no wind, no sound at all. The usual background noise of the countryside felt muted. Even the faint hum of insects seemed quieter. I kept my eyes on it. The circle moved from left to right across the sky. As it passed, the stars behind it faded, not completely black, just dim, like they were being seen through something. I tried to judge its size. It was hard, but it covered a large portion of the sky, bigger than any aircraft I'd ever seen, and too high. Way too high. I checked the road quickly, making sure I was still centered, then looked back up. Still there. Still moving. The motion didn't change. No acceleration, no shift, just a constant, controlled glide. I felt that tightness in my chest again, not panic. More like my body reacting before my brain could catch up. I slowed down even more, almost to a crawl. The road stretched out ahead, empty. The fields on either side were dark and still. The shape passed directly overhead. For a moment, it blocked a cluster of brighter stars. I could see the outline more clearly then. A perfect circle. Or close enough to it. No lights, no detail, just absence. Then it kept moving, toward the right side of the sky. I turned my head slightly to follow it through the windshield. It didn't change altitude, didn't tilt, didn't do anything except move. Then it reached the edge of my view, and it was gone. Not fading, not disappearing gradually, just not there anymore. The stars returned to normal. Full brightness, like nothing had passed in front of them. I sat there for a second, the car barely moving. My hands were still on the wheel, but I wasn't really driving. I looked around the sky, scanning for it. Nothing. Just stars, exactly as they had been before. I checked my mirrors. Nothing behind me. The road was still empty. I pulled the car to a stop on the shoulder. The gravel crunched under the tires. I turned off the engine. The silence settled in immediately. I stepped out of the car. The air felt cooler now. Still. Quiet. I looked up again. The sky stretched out above me, unchanged. I stood there for a minute, turning slowly, trying to find any sign of it. Nothing. No movement. No dimming. Just stars. I checked my phone. 12:28 a.m. That made me pause. I was sure it had been closer to 12:10 when I first noticed the sky change. It didn't feel like nearly 20 minutes had passed, more like a few minutes. I stood there for another minute, listening. The night sounds started to come back gradually. Insects. A distant truck somewhere far off. Everything felt normal again. I got back in the car and started the engine. The headlights came back on, illuminating the road ahead. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping again. But every so often, I found myself glancing up at the sky through the windshield, watching the stars, making sure they stayed where they were. When I finally pulled into my driveway and shut off the car, I sat there for a second. The engine ticked as it cooled. The night felt quiet again. I looked up one last time. The sky was clear, unchanged. But for a moment, just a second, I thought I saw a faint darkening in the corner of my vision. A smooth curve against the stars. Gone before I could turn my head to look directly at it. I noticed the line because it didn't match anything in the room. I was lying on my back, staring at the wall across from my bed. It was late, probably past 2 a.m. I hadn't checked the time in a while, but I couldn't sleep. Just one of those nights where your brain won't shut off. My room faces the backyard. There's a small window with blinds, and usually you get a little bit of streetlight bleeding through from the side, just enough to see shapes. But this wasn't that. This was a thin line, straight, faint, but clearly there. It stretched vertically along the wall, about a foot wide, like a narrow beam of light that had been flattened. At first, I thought maybe a car had turned down the street and the headlights were catching the window at a weird angle. But it wasn't moving the way headlights do. It was too slow. I stayed still, watching it. The line crept sideways across the wall, not jittery, not flickering, just a steady, smooth motion, like it was being dragged across the surface. I pushed myself up slightly on my elbows. The room stayed quiet, no sound of a car passing, no engine, no tires on pavement, nothing, just that line of light moving. It reached the corner where the wall meets the ceiling. Then it continued upward. That's when it started to feel wrong. Light doesn't usually behave like that. If it was coming through the window, it should have stretched and distorted as it climbed. But it didn't. It kept the same shape, same width, same intensity, like it wasn't coming from outside at all. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, but didn't stand up yet, just sat there, watching. The line slid onto the ceiling, still straight, still even. It moved slowly across the ceiling now, heading toward the center of the room. I glanced at the window. The blinds hadn't moved. No shifting shadows, no passing light from outside. I looked back at the ceiling. The line was still there. Still moving. I stood up this time, slowly, like I didn't want to disturb anything. The floor felt cold under my feet. I took a few steps closer, standing directly under it. The light didn't react. Didn't change brightness, didn't flicker. It just kept going. I reached up slightly, not touching it, just holding my hand near where it passed. There was no warmth, no sensation at all. It wasn't like standing in sunlight or under a lamp. It felt like nothing. That made it worse. I pulled my hand back. The line continued moving. It crossed over the center of the ceiling now. Then it started to fade. Not all at once, gradually, like someone was dimming it. The edges softened first, then the brightness dropped. Within a couple seconds, it was gone. The room went back to how it had been before. Dark. Still. I stood there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to come back. Nothing did. I walked over to the window and pulled the blinds up slightly. Outside was quiet. The backyard was dark. No lights, no cars, nothing that could have caused it. I let the blinds fall back into place, turned around. The room looked normal again, but something felt off. I couldn't explain it. I got back into bed but stayed sitting up, listening, trying to catch any sound I might have missed. After a minute or two, I checked my phone. 2:14 a.m. That seemed about right. Maybe a little later than I expected, but close enough. I set it down on the nightstand. Then I noticed something else. The room smelled different, faint, almost like after a thunderstorm, that sharp, clean smell. I sat there trying to place it. It wasn't strong, just enough to notice. I got up again and walked toward the window. The smell seemed stronger near it. I pulled the blinds back again. Still nothing outside, just darkness. I opened the window slightly. Cool air came in, normal air, no smell. I closed it again, turned back toward the room. That's when I saw it again. Not on the wall, on the floor this time. A faint line near the foot of the bed. I froze. It was the same shape, same width, same soft glow, but it wasn't moving. Not yet. I didn't move either, just watched. After a few seconds, it started to shift, slowly, sliding across the floor, toward the wall. I took a step back. My heart was beating faster now. The line reached the base of the wall, then climbed, same as before. No distortion, no change in shape, just moving upward. I felt that tightness in my chest again, that sense that something was happening just outside of what I could understand. I looked at the window again. Still nothing, no source, no explanation. I turned back. The line had reached halfway up the wall. Then it stopped. Just for a second, completely still. Then it dimmed, faster this time. Within a second, it was gone. The room was dark again. I stood there, not moving, waiting. Nothing came back. After a while, I got back into bed. I didn't lie down right away, just sat there, staring at the wall where it had been. Eventually, I checked my phone again. 2:26 a.m. I frowned. That didn't make sense. It hadn't felt like 12 minutes, maybe 3 or 4. I set the phone down slowly, lay back, closed my eyes. I didn't fall asleep right away. I kept thinking about the way the light moved, too steady, too controlled, and how it didn't seem to come from anywhere. At some point, I must have drifted off, because when I woke up, it was morning. Sunlight coming through the window normally. Everything looked fine. But when I got up and looked at the wall across from my bed, there was something I didn't recognize at first. A faint, straight mark, barely visible, running vertically, exactly where the light had first appeared. I noticed the light through my eyelids before I woke up all the way. It felt like someone had turned on a lamp in the room, not bright enough to hurt, just enough to shift the darkness behind my eyes. That kind of soft glow you get when morning starts creeping in through the blinds. I didn't open my eyes right away. I just lay there, half awake, thinking maybe I'd slept later than I meant to. Then something felt off. The air in the room was still, too still. Usually in the morning I can hear things. Cars passing, someone's door closing down the hall, pipes in the building. But there was nothing. Just quiet. I opened my eyes. The room was completely dark. The only light came from the faint red digits of the clock on my nightstand. 2:19 a.m. I frowned and blinked a few times. The glow I'd seen through my eyelids was gone. The ceiling above me looked the same as it always did at night. Flat, shadowed, nothing unusual. I rolled onto my side and looked toward the window. The curtains were closed and there was no light coming through them. For a second, I just lay there trying to figure out what had woken me. Then I shrugged it off. Probably a car passing by with headlights hitting the wall at the right angle. It happens sometimes, especially since my apartment sits right off a side street in a small town outside Albany. I closed my eyes again. Sleep came back quickly. The next time I woke up, the same thing was happening. Light behind my eyelids. This time I was more aware of it. The brightness felt steady, not flickering, just a soft, even glow pressing through the darkness. I kept my eyes closed for a few seconds, listening. Nothing. No traffic. No voices. Not even the usual hum from the fridge in the kitchen. The quiet felt heavier than before. I opened my eyes again. Dark. Completely dark. The glow vanished the instant my eyes opened. I pushed myself up on one elbow and checked the clock. 2:27 a.m. I stared at the numbers for a moment. I was sure it hadn't been that long since the last time I checked. It felt like maybe a minute or two. Not 8. I sat up fully in bed. The sheets rustled quietly as I moved. The room stayed dark. I swung my legs over the side and stood up. The floor was cold. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside slightly. Outside, the street was empty. The nearest streetlight cast a dull orange glow on the pavement, but it didn't reach my window directly. No cars, no movement. I let the curtain fall back into place. The apartment felt normal again, just quiet. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a glass of water. The digital clock on the stove read 2:28, same as the one in my bedroom. No power outage or reset. I stood there for a minute, trying to shake off the feeling that something wasn't lining up. Eventually, I went back to bed. This time, I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. The light came again, slowly, not like someone flipping a switch. More like the room itself was filling with brightness. Even with my eyes open, I could feel it before I saw anything. Then, just for a second, I thought I actually saw it. The ceiling looked slightly lighter, not bright, just lifted out of the darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. The room snapped back to normal. I grabbed the clock and pulled it closer to my face. 2:36 a.m. I stared at the numbers. That didn't make sense. It felt like seconds had passed, not 9 minutes. I sat there holding the clock, my mind trying to catch up. I couldn't remember what had happened in between, just the light. The same soft glow, then darkness again. I set the clock back down slowly. My chest felt tight, though I wasn't sure why. There were explanations, I told myself. Maybe I dozed off without realizing it. Maybe the time just felt shorter because I was half asleep. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like I'd been awake the whole time. I lay back down again, but I didn't close my eyes. I kept staring at the ceiling, waiting. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. The room stayed dark. The quiet stayed normal. Eventually, my eyes grew heavy. I must have drifted off again. When I woke up next, it was morning. Sunlight pushed through the curtains, lighting up the room the way it always does. For a moment, I just lay there, letting everything settle. Then I reached for the clock. 7:42 a.m. Normal. Everything felt normal again. I got up, made coffee, went through the usual routine. But something stayed in the back of my mind. So before leaving for work, I checked something. I opened the settings on my phone and looked at the screen time log. There was a gap between 2:27 and 2:36. No activity, no notifications, nothing. Just a blank stretch of time. Later that night, when I got back home, I stood in the bedroom for a while before going to bed. I looked up at the ceiling. It looked the same as always, flat, ordinary. But when I turned off the light and the room went dark, I hesitated before closing my eyes. Because for a second, just before the darkness settled, and I thought I saw the faintest hint of brightness forming again. I noticed the star because it didn't belong where it was. I'd been sitting on the hood of my truck for a while, maybe half an hour, out on a gravel pull-off near the edge of a soybean field. It was one of those places locals use during the day to turn around farm equipment. But at night, it's just empty. It was late August, warm even after midnight, and the air had that dry smell from the fields. No wind, just stillness. You could hear insects out in the crops and the occasional distant truck on the highway a couple miles away. I wasn't doing anything in particular. Just lying back, looking up. The sky out there gets pretty clear if you're far enough from town. You can see way more stars than you expect. I'd been tracing out constellations, the obvious ones first, then the smaller clusters you only notice if you stare long enough. That's when I saw it. A star that wasn't in the right place. It was faint, not one of the brighter ones, sitting just off to the side of a cluster I recognized. At first I thought maybe I just misremembered the pattern, so I kept looking at it. After a few seconds it moved. Not fast, just a slow drift to the right. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus on it. Satellites do that sometimes. You can catch them moving if you stare long enough. But this one didn't move the way satellites usually do. It wasn't crossing the sky in a straight path. It was sliding sideways, relative to the stars around it. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, keeping my eyes locked on it. The star continued drifting slowly. Then it stopped. Completely still. I blinked a few times. The rest of the sky stayed steady. Only that one had moved. Now it just hung there, out of place. I sat up fully. The metal of the truck hood was still warm under my hands. The insects in the field kept their steady rhythm. Everything felt normal except for that one point of light. I checked around it, looking for any sign of blinking or color changes that might suggest an aircraft. Nothing. Just a steady white dot. I glanced down for a second to adjust my position, then looked back up. Still there, still in the wrong spot. I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3, 5 seconds. 10. The light didn't move. Then it shifted again. A small movement, almost like a correction. It drifted slightly upward this time, then stopped. The motion was too controlled, too deliberate. I felt that slow tightening in my chest again. The kind that comes when something doesn't add up. I swung my legs over the side of the truck and stood up, trying to get a better angle. The gravel crunched under my boots. The star remained fixed in place. For a moment, I wondered if I was looking at two different stars and confusing them. But I knew I wasn't. The pattern around it had changed. I could still see the original cluster, and this one sat just outside it, where it hadn't been before. The light held steady for another few seconds. Then it dimmed, not quickly, just a gradual fading, like someone lowering the brightness. I leaned forward slightly, trying to keep it in view. The surrounding stars stayed the same, only that one grew fainter. Within maybe 3 seconds, it was barely visible. Then it was gone. Not streaking away, not dropping, just gone. I stood there staring at the empty space. The cluster of stars around it looked normal again, like nothing had changed. I waited, half expecting it to come back. It didn't. The insects in the field kept going. A breeze picked up slightly, moving the tops of the soybean plants in a soft ripple. I looked around the sky, scanning for any other movement. Nothing unusual, just the steady, distant points of light. I climbed back onto the hood of the truck and lay down again. But I couldn't relax the way I had before. Every few seconds I checked that same spot in the sky. Still nothing. After a while, I started watching other stars, just to see if any of them would move the same way. A couple satellites passed by, crossing the sky in smooth lines. They looked completely different. Predictable. Consistent. That one hadn't been. I checked my phone for the time. 12:47 a.m. I frowned. That didn't seem right. I was pretty sure it had been closer to 12:30 when I first lay down. I tried to remember how long I'd been watching that star. It didn't feel like more than a minute or two, but the time didn't match that. I sat up again, suddenly aware of how quiet everything felt. The highway noise had faded. The insects seemed quieter too, though they were still there. I slid off the truck and walked around to the driver's side. The interior light came on when I opened the door. For a second, the brightness made me squint. I started the engine. The radio came on mid-song, like normal. Everything felt grounded again, normal. I took one last look at the sky before pulling out. The stars looked exactly the same as they had when I arrived. No missing points. No movement. But as I drove away down the gravel road, I caught myself checking the rearview mirror more than once. Not for cars, for that spot in the sky, just in case it came back. I noticed the camera first. When I woke up, my phone was in my hand, screen glowing faintly in the dark. That alone was strange, because I always left it on the nightstand when I went to bed. I don't fall asleep scrolling or anything like that. The camera app was open, front-facing camera, pointed straight up at the ceiling. For a few seconds I just lay there, still half asleep, trying to piece together what I was looking at. My thumb was resting near the shutter button, like I'd been about to take a picture. I blinked and checked the time. 3:18 a.m. The room was dark except for the phone screen. My ceiling looked normal, plain white, a little uneven in spots from old paint. The ceiling fan above me was off. I lowered the phone and sat up. My head felt a little heavy, like I'd woken up too quickly. I didn't remember picking up the phone. I didn't remember waking up at all before that moment. I glanced at the nightstand. The charging cable was still plugged in, but the phone wasn't connected to it anymore. I reached over and picked up the cable. It hadn't been yanked or pulled out, just unplugged cleanly. I looked back at the phone. The camera app was still open. The preview showed the ceiling, but slightly off-center, like the phone had been angled from where I was lying. I tapped the gallery icon. There was a photo. Timestamp 3:17 a.m., taken 1 minute before I woke up. I opened it. At first, it just looked like a dark picture of the ceiling. Then I noticed the blur. Near the top of the frame, slightly to the left, there was a faint shape. Not sharp enough to make out clearly, just a smudge of gray against the darker background. It didn't match anything in the room. I zoomed in. The blur wasn't round or straight-edged. It had an uneven outline, like something partially out of focus and moving at the same time. I lowered the phone and looked up at the ceiling again. Nothing there. Just the fan and the light fixture. I stood up slowly. The floor was cold under my feet. I walked to the wall switch and turned on the overhead light. The room filled with soft yellow light. I looked at the ceiling again. Still nothing unusual. No marks, no shadows that matched the shape in the photo. I turned the light off and looked again. The ceiling returned to darkness. I checked the photo once more. The blur was definitely there. Not something from the room, not a shadow cast by anything I recognized. I scrolled through the rest of the camera roll. No other pictures from the night, just that one. I checked the video folder too, just in case. Nothing. I sat back down on the bed, holding the phone in both hands. My mind kept trying to fill in the gap between going to sleep and waking up. I couldn't remember anything. No dreams, no noise. Nothing that would have made me pick up the phone. I glanced at the window. The curtains were drawn, but I could see a faint outline of the streetlight outside bleeding through the fabric. Everything looked normal. I stood up and walked over to the window, pulled the curtain aside. The street outside was empty. A few parked cars, no movement. I closed the curtain again and turned back toward the bed. The phone screen dimmed slightly in my hand. I tapped it to keep it awake. The camera app was still open, still aimed at the ceiling. I raised it slowly and pointed it up again, trying to match the angle from the photo. The preview showed nothing but darkness and the faint outline of the fan. I took another picture, checked it, completely normal. No blur, no shape. I took a few more from different angles. All the same, just the ceiling. I sat back down again, the room quiet. Too quiet. I realized I couldn't hear the usual background noise from the building. No distant footsteps, no pipes, no hum from the hallway lights, just silence. I looked at the phone again. The battery was lower than it should have been, around 42%. I was sure it had been closer to full when I went to bed. I set the phone down on the nightstand and lay back down. But I didn't close my eyes. I kept staring at the ceiling, waiting. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Eventually, the quiet started to feel normal again. The faint hum of the building returned. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed. I must have fallen asleep again at some point. When I woke up in the morning, sunlight filled the room. Everything looked ordinary. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But the phone was still on the nightstand, and the photo was still there. Later that day, I showed it to my friend Elena. She squinted at the image for a while. Could be motion blur, she said. Maybe you moved the phone while taking it. While I was asleep, she shrugged. People do weird stuff in their sleep. That made sense, at least on the surface. But something about the shape didn't look like motion blur. It didn't streak across the frame. It just hovered there. That night, before going to bed, I put the phone face down on the nightstand again, plugged it in, made sure it was exactly where I usually left it. Then I turned off the light. The room went dark. I lay there staring up at the ceiling. After a few minutes, I felt that same strange awareness again, like something above me, not moving, just there. I didn't reach for the phone this time. I just kept my eyes open, waiting. Nothing happened. Eventually, I closed my eyes. Sometime later, I woke up again. The phone was in my hand. The camera app was open, and the screen was already showing the ceiling. I saw the light before I heard anything unusual. I was about halfway down Oak Ridge Lane, walking home from a late shift at the grocery store. It was just after 11 p.m., and the neighborhood was quiet. In that way it gets when everyone's already inside and the TVs are on low behind closed windows. The streetlights along that road aren't very bright. They leave long patches of shadow between them, especially near the older houses where the trees hang low over the sidewalks. I'd walked that route 100 times. That's why it stood out immediately. There was a pale light sitting low between two houses about 30 yards ahead. At first, I thought it was someone's porch light bleeding through a gap in the fence, but it wasn't attached to anything. It just hung there, about 5 feet off the ground. Soft white, not harsh or yellow like a normal bulb. More like a dull glow, almost like fog lit from within. I slowed down a little, The houses on either side of it were dark, no lights in the windows, no movement. The light didn't flicker, didn't sway. It just stayed perfectly still in the narrow space between the two properties. I stopped walking. For a few seconds, I just stood there staring at it. The air felt cool, slightly damp, like it might rain later. There was no wind. The leaves on the trees above me were completely still. I looked around the street to see if anyone else was outside. No one. The road behind me was empty. No cars, no footsteps, nothing. When I looked back at the light, it hadn't changed at all. I took a few slow steps forward. The gravel along the edge of the sidewalk crunched under my shoes. The light stayed in place. Now I was close enough to see that it wasn't casting any real shadow on the ground. The grass beneath it looked slightly brighter, but not the way it would under a normal light source. It felt like the glow wasn't coming from a single point, more like the air itself was lit. I stopped again. Something about it made me hesitate. Not fear exactly, just a strong sense that I shouldn't get too close. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, then I took one more step forward. The light moved. Not toward me, up. It lifted straight up from where it had been hovering. Smooth, silent, no acceleration, no jerk. Just a steady rise. I froze in place. The light climbed slowly between the two houses, passing above the roofline. For a second, it was visible against the darker sky, a small, pale sphere drifting upward. Then it kept going, higher, higher, until it passed out of view above the rooftops. I stayed there, staring up at the empty space between the houses, waiting for it to come back down. It didn't. After a few seconds, the normal sounds of the street seemed to return. A distant car somewhere far off, the faint rustle of leaves overhead. I walked slowly toward the spot where the light had been. The grass there looked normal. No scorch marks, no signs of anything having been there. I crouched down and touched the ground. Cool, slightly damp from the evening air. Nothing unusual. I stood back up and looked up again. The sky was clear, a few stars visible between the branches. No light. I stayed there for another minute, like half expecting something else to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, I continued down the sidewalk toward my house. The rest of the walk felt normal, but I kept glancing back over my shoulder, just in case. When I reached my driveway, I turned one last time to look down the street. The space between the two houses was dark now, like it had always been. I went inside, locked the door, and set my keys on the counter. For a while, I just stood there in the kitchen, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Eventually, I went to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I picked up my phone and checked the time. 11:19 p.m. That made me pause. I was sure it had been around 11:05 when I first saw the light. The walk from there to my house should have taken maybe 5 minutes. I stood up and went to the window. From there, I could see the top of the street where the houses were. Everything looked normal. No lights, no movement. But as I stood there staring into the dark, I noticed something small. A faint glow just above the rooftops, not in the same place as before. Higher, much higher. It stayed there for a second, then it dimmed and disappeared. I saw the glow before I realized how quiet everything had gotten. It was just after 10 p.m., and I was driving down a 2-lane road outside of Salina, Kansas, heading back home after visiting my friend Lucas. The road runs through miles of farmland, mostly corn and wheat, with long stretches where there's nothing but fields on both sides. I had the radio on low, some late-night talk show fading in and out as I got farther from town. At some point, I noticed the signal had dropped completely. The radio didn't fade, it just went silent. No static, no voices, just nothing. I reached over and tapped the screen, thinking maybe I'd accidentally muted it. The display was still on, showing the station, but there was no sound. I frowned and glanced up at the road. That's when I saw it. A soft red glow hovering just above the crops on the right side of the road. It was faint at first, barely noticeable against the darkness. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It hung maybe 10 feet above the tops of the corn, casting a dull red tint over a small patch of the field. Not bright enough to light everything up, just enough to make the stalks underneath it look darker and slightly red. I eased off the gas. The tires hummed against the asphalt. The glow stayed in place. At first, I thought it might be a piece of farm equipment with a light on, but there was no structure around it, no barn, No tractor, just the field stretching out into the dark. I slowed down more, almost to a crawl. The glow didn't flicker, didn't move, just hovered. I rolled down my window halfway. The night air was still and warm, no wind, no insects. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Out there, you always hear something at night: crickets, frogs, wind in the crops. But now there was nothing. I leaned slightly toward the open window, listening. Nothing. The glow remained steady. I drove a little farther, bringing the car nearly alongside it. Now I could see it more clearly. It wasn't a beam or a spotlight. It was more like a small cloud of light, evenly distributed, with no visible source. The edges were soft, blending into the darkness around it. I tapped the brake and let the car roll to a stop. The engine idled quietly. The glow hovered maybe 20 yards off the road. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I noticed something else. My headlights didn't seem to reach it properly. The beams stopped short, like they were dimming before they touched the glow. The corn between me and the light looked darker than it should have been. I felt that same tightness in my chest again. I didn't want to get out of the car, but I also didn't want to drive past it without looking a little closer. I opened the door halfway and stepped 1 foot onto the road. The gravel crunched under my shoe. The glow didn't react. It stayed perfectly still. I stepped fully out of the car and stood there, the door still open behind me. The engine continued to idle. The headlights cast a narrow path across the road and into the field, but the red glow seemed untouched by it. I took a few steps toward the ditch. The grass along the roadside brushed against my legs. The glow stayed in place. I stopped at the edge of the ditch and looked out over the crops. The red light hovered there, silent and steady. Then it moved, not sideways, not toward me, up. It lifted straight upward, smooth, even. No change in brightness, no flicker, just a steady rise. I froze. The glow climbed above the height of the corn, then above the nearby fence posts. It kept going. Slowly at first, then a little faster. Still no sound. Still no change in intensity. It rose above the field until it was level with the top of the trees in the distance, then higher. I tilted my head back to keep it in view. The glow remained the same dull red, not getting dimmer or brighter as it climbed. That part didn't make sense. Anything moving that far away should change in brightness. This didn't. It just stayed the same. Then it reached a point where it was almost directly above me. For a moment it paused. I held my breath. The silence around me felt heavier than before. Then the glow shot upward. Not gradually. Not like before. Faster. Straight up. Within a second it was high above the field. Within 2 seconds, it was just a small red point against the black sky. Then it vanished. No fading, no streak, just gone. The moment it disappeared, the sound came back. Crickets, wind through the corn, the distant hum of a truck on the highway. I stood there for a few seconds, still staring at the sky. Nothing else moved, no other lights, no aircraft, just stars. I slowly walked back to the car and got in. The radio came back on by itself. Mid-sentence, like it had never stopped. I checked the clock on the dashboard, 10:58 p.m. I stared at it for a second. That didn't seem right. I was sure it had been closer to 10:40 when I first saw the glow. I couldn't account for the time. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping again. But when I passed another stretch of farmland about 10 minutes later, I found myself looking out over the fields. Just in case, everything looked normal. Dark. Empty. But I kept thinking about how the glow hadn't changed at all as it rose, like distance didn't matter to it. And when I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, I noticed the red tint lingering faintly in my vision, as if I'd been staring at it longer than I thought. I didn't notice it until the next morning. I was making coffee, still half asleep, scrolling through my phone like I always do before work. One of the first notifications was from my security camera app. Motion detected, 2:11 a.m. That wasn't unusual. The camera points out into the backyard and it picks up everything. Cats, wind moving the branches, sometimes even bugs flying too close to the lens. I tapped the notification while leaning against the counter. The clip loaded. The yard looked normal at first. Dark grass, the fence line, the shadow of the oak tree in the back corner. The porch light had been off, so the only illumination was a faint glow from the neighbor's light a few houses over. Then the flash hit. The entire screen went white. Not like a lightning strike where it flickers, just a single overwhelming burst of brightness. For one frame, the whole yard looked like it was daytime. The grass, the fence, even the leaves on the tree were visible in sharp detail. Then it was gone. The next frame dropped straight back into darkness. I frowned and replayed it. Same thing. Normal. Flash. Dark again. Then I noticed the timestamp. Before the flash, 2:11:08. After the flash, 2:11:14. 6 seconds missing. I scrubbed through the clip again slowly, frame by frame. There were no frames in between. It jumped straight from the moment before the flash to several seconds after. I set the coffee down and watched it again. The flash didn't look like lightning. It didn't have that jagged, uneven brightness. This was uniform, like the entire yard had been illuminated from above. I glanced out the kitchen window into the backyard. Morning light filled the space now. Everything looked normal. Nothing burned, nothing damaged. I opened the weather app. Clear skies all night. Snowstorms anywhere near my area. I went back to the clip. This time I turned the volume up. The camera records audio too. Before the flash, I could hear faint night sounds. Crickets, a distant car, the usual. During the flash, there was nothing. No thunder, no crack, no electrical pop, just silence. After the flash, the crickets came back immediately, like nothing had happened. I checked the rest of the timeline. There was another alert at 2:12. I opened it. The yard was dark again, but something looked off. The porch light, it was off. That wasn't unusual by itself, except I always leave it on overnight. I walked over to the back door and flipped the switch. The light turned on. Normal. I checked the bulb, still working fine. I went back to the video. In the clip, the porch light was definitely off. I scrubbed through it again. The timestamp read 2:12:01. No flash this time, just the yard sitting in darkness. I went back to the first clip. Right before the flash, the porch light had been on. Right after, it was off. I hadn't touched the switch. I stood there for a minute trying to make sense of it. Then I decided to check something else. I walked outside. The morning air felt cool and damp, the grass still holding on to dew. I stepped onto the lawn and looked around. At first, everything seemed normal. Then I noticed a patch near the center of the yard. The grass looked slightly different. Not burned, just flattened, in a rough circle, maybe 8 feet across. I walked over and crouched down. The blades were bent in the same direction, like something had pressed down evenly. I ran my hand over them. They felt dry, warmer than the surrounding grass. I pulled my hand back slowly. That didn't make sense. The sun hadn't been up long enough to heat anything yet. I stood up and looked around the yard again. Nothing else seemed out of place. No footprints. No marks leading to or from the circle. Just that one patch. I went back inside and replayed the clip again. This time I paused it right before the flash. The yard looked normal. Then I stepped forward one frame. White. Everything washed out. Then the next frame. Dark. But something else caught my eye. At the very top of the frame, just above the fence line, there was a faint shape. Not clear. Just a darker area against the brightness. I zoomed in. It didn't look like anything I recognized. Not a tree branch, not a bird, more like a flat edge, but it only appeared for that one frame. I scrubbed back and forth. Before the flash, nothing. After, nothing. Only during that instant. I leaned back from the screen. My coffee had gone cold on the counter. I picked it up and took a sip anyway. Then I checked the timestamp again. 2:11:08 to 2:11:14. 6 seconds gone. I tried to imagine what could happen in 6 seconds that the camera didn't record. The rest of the day I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, before going to bed, I stood in the backyard for a while. The porch light was on again. The grass looked normal in the dark. I kept glancing up at the sky. Clear. Stars scattered across it. Nothing unusual. Eventually, I went inside and locked the door. Before turning off the lights, I opened the camera app one more time. The live feed showed the yard exactly as it was. Quiet. Still. Normal. I watched it for a minute. Nothing moved. Then, just before I closed the app, the screen flickered. For a split second, the entire yard went bright. Not as intense as the clip from the night before. Just a quick flash. Then it returned to normal. I stared at the screen. The timestamp hadn't changed. No new clip appeared. But when I looked out the window into the yard, the porch light was off. I noticed the glow before I noticed how still the water had gotten. It was late evening, right on that edge where the sky goes from dark blue to black, and I was sitting alone in a small aluminum fishing boat out on Lake Oconee in Georgia. I'd pushed out from the public ramp about an hour earlier, just far enough to get away from the shoreline lights. The water had been moving gently when I first got there, small ripples, the usual sounds of fish breaking the surface now and then. By the time the glow appeared, all of that had stopped. I didn't realize it right away. I was focused on my line, watching the tip of the rod, waiting for any movement. Then something changed in the water just off the side of the boat. At first, it looked like a reflection, a faint patch of light, barely visible, just under the surface. I glanced up at the sky, thinking maybe a cloud had moved and was reflecting something from the horizon. But the sky above me was clear. No moon. Just stars. I looked back down. The light was 5 feet from the boat, just beneath the water. It wasn't bright enough to illuminate anything clearly, but I could see a soft glow spreading through the water like a pale haze. I leaned forward slightly. The surface of the lake was smooth, completely undisturbed. No ripples, no bubbles. The glow didn't flicker. It didn't shift like a reflection would. It just sat there under the surface. I lifted my rod slowly so the line wouldn't drag across it. The glow stayed in place. For a few seconds, I told myself it had to be something natural. Maybe algae, maybe some kind of phosphorescence. But I'd fished that lake plenty of times. I'd never seen anything like it. Then it moved. Not randomly, not drifting with the current. It moved in a straight line, away from the boat. The glow slid under the water, smooth and steady, like something traveling just below the surface. But the water didn't react. No wake, no disturbance. The surface stayed flat. I watched it move farther out, 10 feet, 20. The glow remained the same size, same brightness. It didn't stretch or scatter like light usually does underwater. It stayed concentrated, like it was contained. I stood up slowly in the boat. The metal shifted under my weight with a quiet creak. The glow continued moving, straight away from me toward the darker center of the lake. I glanced around. The shoreline was barely visible now, just faint silhouettes of trees against the sky. No other boats, no lights, no sounds. The lake felt empty. I stepped closer to the edge of the boat, careful not to tip it. The glow kept going. 30 feet, 40. Still no ripple, no sign of anything breaking the surface. Then it stopped, just froze in place under the water. I held my breath without realizing it. The glow hovered there, faint but steady. Then it shifted direction. Not gradually, it just turned, perfectly straight. Now it was moving parallel to the boat, cutting across the water in a line. I turned my body to follow it. The movement was too smooth, too controlled. Fish don't move like that. Nothing in the water moves like that without disturbing the surface. The glow slid past the front of the boat. For a second, it passed directly under the bow. The water just beneath me lit up faintly, a soft, pale glow spreading under the metal. I could see the outline of the boat reflected in it. Then it continued on the other side, still silent, still leaving no trace. I gripped the edge of the boat and leaned over, trying to see deeper. The glow seemed to be about 3 or 4 feet below the surface. I couldn't see anything inside it, just the light itself. Then it stopped again. This time farther out, maybe 50 feet from where I stood. The lake around it remained perfectly still. I waited. My heart felt like it was beating louder than everything else. Then the glow rose slightly. Not enough to break the surface, just closer. The light became a little clearer through the water. Still no shape, no outline, just a brighter patch of pale white. Then it moved again, straight line, away from me, faster this time. Within a few seconds, it was far enough out that it started to fade. Not dimming exactly, just becoming harder to see. Like distance didn't affect it the way it should. It stayed the same brightness, but my eyes struggled to pick it out. Then it was gone. The water returned to normal, dark, flat. The faint ripples came back slowly, like the lake was remembering how to move again. I stood there for a while, staring at the spot where it disappeared. Nothing came back, no glow, no movement. Eventually, I sat back down and picked up my rod again. My hands felt a little unsteady. I looked at the water around the boat. Everything looked the same as it had before, but something felt different. The quiet had a weight to it now. I checked my watch. 9:52 p.m. That confused me. I was sure it had been closer to 9:30 when I noticed the glow. I tried to think back through what had just happened, how long it had lasted. It didn't feel like 20 minutes, more like a few minutes at most. I packed up not long after that, started the small motor, and headed back toward the ramp. The sound of the engine felt louder than usual in the quiet. As I drove across the lake, I kept looking down at the water behind me, half expecting to see the glow following. It didn't. But when I reached the dock and tied the boat up, I noticed something small. Right beneath the surface, just for a second, there was a faint streak of light moving away from the shore. Gone, almost as soon as I saw it. I noticed the silence before I noticed anything moving. It was just after midnight, and I was sitting outside my tent at a small backcountry site in the Allegheny National Forest. I'd hiked in earlier that afternoon, maybe 2 miles off the nearest trailhead, and set up near a shallow creek that ran through a low patch of trees. The spot was quiet, but not empty quiet. There were insects everywhere. Crickets, cicadas, that constant layered sound you get in the woods at night, where it almost becomes background noise. I'd been sitting on a folding stool, just staring into the darkness beyond the trees, letting the sound settle in. Then it stopped. Not gradually, all at once, like someone had cut the sound off. I remember thinking I'd gone temporarily deaf or something because it was that sudden. 1 second it was loud enough to fill everything. The next, nothing. I straightened up without meaning to. The silence felt wrong. The creek was still there, faintly moving over rocks, but even that seemed quieter somehow. I held my breath and listened. No insects, no wind, nothing. I stood up slowly. The ground was soft under my boots, damp from earlier in the evening. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees around me. Everything looked the same. Dark trunks, patches of underbrush, the faint outline of branches against the sky. Then I noticed something off to my right. At first I thought it was just my eyes adjusting. A slight distortion between 2 trees about 20 feet away, like heat shimmer, the kind you see above asphalt on a hot day. But it didn't make sense. It had been cool all evening, and this wasn't rising off the ground. It was vertical, suspended between the trunks. I took a step toward it. The leaves under my boot crunched softly. The shimmer didn't move. It stayed in place, faint, but noticeable once you focused on it. I stopped again. My chest felt tight. The silence pressed in harder the closer I looked at it. I couldn't see through it clearly. The trees behind it looked warped, slightly stretched and blurred, like looking through uneven glass. I leaned my head slightly to the side, trying to change the angle. The distortion shifted subtly, but not like something reflecting light. More like something was occupying that space. I took another step forward. The shimmer reacted. Not fast. It just slid sideways between the trees, smooth, controlled. It didn't break apart or fade immediately. It moved as one piece. I froze. The movement wasn't random. It felt deliberate, like it had noticed me. The shimmer continued drifting between the trees, staying at roughly the same height, about 6 feet off the ground. It passed behind a thicker trunk, disappearing for a moment, then reappeared on the other side. Still intact, still distorting everything behind it. I felt the urge to step back, but I didn't. I just stood there watching it. The silence around me hadn't broken. It felt like the entire forest was holding still. The shimmer moved a few more feet, then stopped, just hovered there. Faint, almost hard to see unless you were looking directly at it. I tried to focus on the edges, but there weren't any clear edges, just a boundary where things stopped looking right. Then it faded, not all at once. The distortion became weaker, less noticeable, until the trees behind it looked normal again, and then it was gone, completely. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the empty space where it had been, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. Then the sound returned, all at once. Crickets, cicadas, that same layered noise filling the air like nothing had happened. I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. The forest felt normal again. But not really. I stepped forward to where the shimmer had been. The ground looked undisturbed. Leaves, dirt, a few small rocks, nothing unusual. I crouched down and touched the soil. Cool, slightly damp, no different from anywhere else. I stood up and looked around again. The trees stood still, dark and quiet, except for the insects. I went back to my tent and sat down on the stool again. For a while, I just listened. Everything sounded normal. But every now and then, I thought I could hear a gap in the noise, like a brief drop in the insect sound that didn't last long enough to be sure. I checked my watch, 12:41 a.m. That made me pause. I was sure it had been around 12:20 when I first noticed the silence. I tried to replay what had happened in my head, how long I'd been standing there, how long the shimmer had been moving. It didn't feel like 20 minutes, more like a few minutes at most. I sat there for a long time after that. Eventually, I crawled into the tent and zipped it up. The sound of the zipper felt louder than it should have. Inside, everything felt smaller, more contained. I lay on my back, staring up at the fabric ceiling. The insect noise continued outside, steady, normal. At some point, I turned my head toward the tent wall, and for just a second I thought I saw it again. A faint ripple in the fabric, not from wind, something passing by on the outside. Then it was gone, and the insects kept going like nothing had ever stopped. I noticed it in my chest before I noticed it in my ears. I was sitting in the living room of my apartment just past 1 a.m. watching something, half paying attention. It was one of those nights where everything felt quiet in a normal way. No traffic outside, no voices from the neighbors, just the usual low hum of appliances and the occasional creak from the building settling. Then something changed. At first, I thought my heart was beating weird. There was this low, steady pressure, like a vibration, but not exactly a sound. It sat right in the middle of my chest, like when a subwoofer is too close and you feel it more than hear it. I muted the TV. The room went silent, but the feeling stayed. That's when I realized it wasn't internal. It was coming from outside. I stood up slowly. The pressure didn't get louder or softer, but it became easier to notice once I focused on it. It wasn't rhythmic like a machine or engine. It was constant, flat, like a tone too low to actually hear. I walked toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the faint glow of the streetlight through them. The pressure didn't change. If anything, it felt slightly stronger near the window. I reached out and pulled the curtain aside. Outside, everything looked normal. The street was empty. A row of parked cars, the same streetlight casting that dull yellow glow onto the pavement. Nothing moving. I opened the window a few inches. Cool night air slipped in. The pressure stayed exactly the same. That was the part that didn't make sense. If it was coming from outside, it should have changed when I opened the window. Gotten clearer, louder. But it didn't. It felt the same, like it wasn't traveling through the air at all. I stood there for a minute, trying to figure it out. Then I noticed something else. The usual background noises were gone. No distant traffic, no hum from other apartments. Even the faint buzz from the streetlight seemed quieter, like everything else had been pushed down underneath that low pressure. I stepped back from the window. The feeling stayed with me. I checked the time on my phone, 1:14 a.m. I don't know why I did that. It just felt important to mark it. I walked toward the front door. There was a moment where I hesitated with my hand on the knob. Not because I was scared, more because I had this weird expectation that something would be different on the other side. I opened the door. The moment I stepped outside, it stopped completely. No fade, no gradual drop, just gone. The air felt normal again, light, quiet in a regular way. I stood there on the small concrete landing outside my apartment, looking up and down the street. Everything looked the same as it had through the window. Still, empty. But now I could hear things again. A car somewhere far off, wind moving lightly through the trees, even the faint electrical buzz of the streetlight. I stepped fully outside and let the door close behind me. The pressure didn't come back. I walked a few steps out toward the sidewalk. The night felt normal. I looked up at the sky, clear, stars scattered across it. Nothing unusual. I stayed there for maybe a minute, just listening. Everything stayed the same. Then I turned around and went back inside. The moment the door closed behind me, the pressure returned. Instant, like flipping a switch. It hit my chest again, that same low, steady hum I couldn't actually hear. I froze in the entryway. That didn't make sense. I opened the door again, stepped outside. Gone. Stepped back in, back again. I repeated it once more just to be sure. Outside, nothing. Inside, it was there. I stood there for a while, halfway between the door and the living room, trying to figure out what could cause something like that. It didn't feel like sound. It didn't behave like sound. I walked back toward the window. The pressure stayed with me. I looked up at the ceiling. There was nothing there. Just the same off-white paint, the same light fixture. But the feeling seemed stronger when I stood directly under it. Not by much. Just enough to notice. I moved a few steps to the side. Slightly less. Back under it. Stronger again. I stayed there for a few seconds, standing still, looking up. The pressure didn't change, didn't pulse, didn't shift. Just stayed constant. Then just for a second it stopped. I hadn't moved, I hadn't done anything. It just cut out. The silence that followed felt deeper than before. Then it came back, same intensity, same steady presence. I checked the time again. 1:22 a.m. That caught me off guard. I was sure I hadn't been standing there that long. It felt like a few minutes at most. I went back to the couch and sat down. The pressure stayed. I turned the TV back on, but the sound felt distant compared to it. Eventually, after a while, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, it was morning. Sunlight filled the room. Everything felt normal. No pressure, no hum. I got up and went about my day like usual. Around the same time, I found myself standing near the door again, waiting, listening. And just as I was about to convince myself it wasn't going to happen again, I felt it. That same low, steady pressure settling into my chest. And without thinking, I reached for the door. I saw the headlights before I saw the road. It was early morning, just before sunrise, and I was driving through a stretch of back roads in western Pennsylvania. I'd left my sister Dana's place around 5 a.m. to beat traffic, but I didn't expect the fog. It rolled in fast. 1 minute the road was clear, the next it was like driving into a wall of gray. I slowed down immediately. The fog was thick enough that my headlights just bounced back at me, lighting up the air instead of the road. Everything beyond maybe 20 feet was swallowed. I kept both hands on the wheel, leaning forward slightly, trying to focus on the faint outline of the center line. The world shrank down to just that narrow slice of pavement. No houses, no trees, just fog. Then I saw them, 2 points of light ahead, faint at first, barely visible through the haze. I assumed it was another car coming toward me. That was normal. The road wasn't busy, but it wasn't empty either. I eased my foot off the gas a little more. The lights grew brighter as I got closer, but something felt off. They weren't moving the way they should. On a straight road like that, oncoming headlights usually shift slightly as the car approaches, the angle changing with distance. These didn't. They stayed fixed, perfectly aligned. I squinted through the windshield. The fog distorted everything, but I could still make out that the lights were higher than they should be. Not by much, just enough to notice. I slowed down further. Now I was creeping along at maybe 15 miles an hour. The headlights stayed in place. They didn't get noticeably closer. Didn't drift, didn't dip or rise. Just hovered there in the fog. I tapped the brake lightly. The car slowed even more. I leaned forward, trying to see if there was a vehicle behind the lights. There wasn't. At least, I couldn't see one. Just the lights themselves, floating in the gray. I rolled down my window slightly. Cold, damp air filled the car. The fog smelled faintly earthy, like wet ground and leaves. I listened for an engine. Nothing. No hum, no tires on pavement, just silence. I looked back at the lights. Still there, still hovering. I came to a complete stop. The car idled quietly. The lights didn't react. They didn't brighten or dim. They didn't move at all. I checked my mirrors out of habit. Nothing behind me, just more fog. When I looked forward again, the lights seemed slightly closer, or maybe I was just imagining it. I couldn't tell. I sat there for a few seconds, debating whether to turn around, but the road was too narrow for that without backing up a long way, and I didn't like the idea of reversing in that fog. So I made a decision. I eased the car forward again, slowly, very slowly. The headlights stayed fixed. As I got closer, I realized something else. They weren't level with the road. They were above it. Maybe 3 or 4 feet higher than where headlights should be. That's when the tight feeling in my chest started. I kept moving forward. The fog seemed to thin slightly, not clearing completely, but enough that I could see a little more of the space around the lights. There was no outline of a car, no shape, just the lights, suspended in midair. I stopped again, closer this time, maybe 30 feet away. I stared at them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. They didn't flicker, didn't blink, just a steady, dull white. I reached over and turned off my headlights. The road in front of me disappeared into darkness, but the floating lights remained, unchanged. That's when the fog shifted. It didn't clear all at once, it just thinned enough in that specific spot. For a brief second, I could see the road beneath the lights. Empty. Nothing there. No vehicle. No structure. Just pavement. The lights hovered above it. Then, as the fog continued to shift, the lights dimmed, not fading out gradually, just becoming less visible as the air cleared. Within a few seconds, they were gone. Completely. The fog thinned enough that I could see farther down the road. There was nothing there. No car, no taillights driving away, no turnoff where something could have gone. Just an empty stretch of road disappearing into the distance. I sat there for a moment, my headlights still off, then I turned them back on. The beam cut through what was left of the fog. The road looked normal again. I drove forward slowly, passing the spot where the lights had been. There was nothing unusual about it, just asphalt, a faded center line, grass along the edges. I kept going. The fog gradually thinned as I drove farther. By the time I reached the next intersection, it had almost cleared completely. I checked the clock on the dashboard. 5:32 a.m. That made me pause. I was sure it had been around 5:10 when I first hit the fog. The stretch of road I'd been on shouldn't have taken that long. I tried to replay what had just happened, how long I'd been sitting there watching the lights. It didn't feel like 20 minutes, more like a few minutes at most. I drove the rest of the way home without seeing anything else. But every time another car approached from the opposite direction, I found myself watching the headlights carefully, making sure they were attached to something. And when I finally pulled into my driveway and shut off the engine, I sat there for a minute, staring down the empty street, half expecting to see those same two lights hanging there in the distance. But the road stayed empty. I woke up already aware of it, not from a sound, not from a dream, just this immediate, quiet certainty that I wasn't alone in the room. My eyes opened slowly, like I didn't want to move too fast and confirm it. The room was dark. The only light came from the digital clock on my dresser, casting a faint red glow across the wall. 2:46 a.m. I stayed completely still, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement. But the feeling didn't go away. It wasn't panic. It was more focused than that, like my attention had been pulled in one direction, toward the window. I sleep with the bed positioned so I can see it without turning my head. It's on the left side of the room, about 6 feet away, with thin curtains that let a little streetlight through at night. I looked at it. The curtains hung still. No movement. No shadow passing behind them. Everything looked normal. But the feeling stayed. I shifted slightly under the blanket, testing if the movement would trigger anything. Nothing happened. Still quiet, still. I told myself it was just one of those things. Waking up halfway through a sleep cycle, brain still in that alert state. But then I noticed the air. It felt warmer near the window, not dramatically, just enough to register. The rest of the room was cool. I always keep the thermostat low at night. But that side, it felt different. I sat up slowly. The mattress creaked faintly under my weight. I waited. Nothing changed. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. The floor was cold. I took a step toward the window. The warmth became more noticeable. Still subtle, but real. Like standing near a vent that was barely on. I stopped about 2 feet away from the curtains. My chest felt tight again, the same way it does when something doesn't add up. I listened carefully. The apartment was quiet. No traffic outside. No noise from neighbors. Even the usual hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen seemed distant. I reached out and touched the curtain. The fabric felt normal, cool. I slid it slightly to the side. The window was closed, locked. I checked the latch just to be sure. Still secure. Outside, the street was empty. A single streetlight illuminated the sidewalk and part of the road. No one standing there. No cars passing. Nothing. I leaned closer to the glass. The warmth felt strongest right near the window. I held my hand up, palm facing it. There was definitely a difference, like heat was radiating from the other side. That didn't make sense. It was cold outside. I'd checked the weather earlier. Low 40s. There was no reason for the window to feel warm. I pulled my hand back slowly. The warmth faded as I stepped back. 2 steps away, the air felt normal again. I stood there, looking at the window, trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to open it, to check, but something about that idea felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just not something I should do. I stayed there for another, just watching. Nothing moved. The curtain hung still. The glass reflected a faint outline of my room behind me. Then for a second I thought I saw something in the reflection. Not outside, inside, a darker shape behind me. I turned around immediately. The room was empty. Bed, dresser, chair in the corner, nothing else. I turned back to the window. The reflection looked normal now, just the room. I stepped back again. The warmth near the window seemed to fade slightly. Not completely, but less noticeable. I checked the time again, 2:52 a.m. That made me pause. It felt like maybe a minute or two had passed, not 6. I tried to replay what I'd just done, standing up, walking over, checking the window. It didn't feel like it had taken that long. I went back to the bed and sat down. The feeling of being watched hadn't fully gone away. It had just shifted. Less focused now, more spread out. I lay back down slowly, keeping my eyes on the window. The room stayed quiet. Nothing moved. After a few minutes, my eyes started to feel heavy again. I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up in the morning, everything felt normal. Sunlight came through the curtains. The room was the same as always. I got up and walked over to the window again. The glass felt cold. Normal. No warmth. No difference in the air. I unlocked it and opened it slightly. Cold air came in, exactly what I expected. I stood there for a minute, letting it settle. Then I closed it again. Later that day, I checked something without really thinking about it. The inside of the glass, there were faint marks. Not fingerprints exactly, more like smudges. On the outside, I could see them when the light hit at the right angle. They weren't there before. I would have noticed. They were higher than I could easily reach from outside without a ladder. I stared at them for a while. Then I wiped them away. That night when I went to bed, I left the curtains slightly open, just enough to see the window clearly. I lay there in the dark, staring at it, waiting. Nothing happened for a long time. The room stayed quiet, the air stayed cool. Eventually, my eyes started to close, and just before I fell asleep, I felt it again. That same slight warmth, right near the window. I saw the reflection before I saw what it was reflecting off of. I was driving home from a late shift, maybe around 2:10 in the morning, on a stretch of highway that cuts through low hills and patches of forest in northern Arizona. It's not a busy road at that hour. You can go 10 minutes without seeing another car. The night was clear, no clouds, just a sky full of stars. My headlights stretched out ahead of me, catching the road, the guardrails, and occasionally the reflective signs along the shoulder. I was maybe 15 minutes from home when something flashed above the road. Just for a split second, a sharp metallic glint. I blinked, thinking I'd caught a reflection off a sign or something I hadn't noticed. But there weren't any signs overhead on that stretch. No overpasses, no wires crossing the road. I slowed down slightly and leaned forward, scanning ahead. The road curved gently to the right. Nothing there. Then it happened again. Another brief flash, higher this time. I lifted my gaze above the road. That's when I saw it. Something suspended in the air. Not very big, maybe the size of a small car, but it was hard to judge at that distance. It didn't have a clear shape, just a dark outline against the sky with a surface that caught my headlights in a way that made it look metallic. It hung above the road, maybe 50 or 60 feet up, completely still. I eased off the gas. The engine quieted slightly as the car slowed. The thing above the road didn't move. I glanced at the speedometer, then back up. Still there, I couldn't hear anything. No engine noise, no wind, nothing. I rolled down the window halfway. Cold air rushed in, carrying the faint smell of dry earth. Still no sound. The object stayed in place. My headlights hit it at just the right angle again, and I saw another brief glint, like light reflecting off a curved surface. I slowed down more. Now I was moving at maybe 30 miles an hour. I kept my eyes on it, trying to make sense of the shape. It didn't look like a drone, too big, and it wasn't blinking or showing any lights of its own, just reflecting mine. I tapped the brake lightly. The car dipped forward a little. The object didn't react. It didn't sway or drift. It just hovered there. I felt that same slow tightening in my chest. I checked my mirrors. Nothing behind me. The road was empty. When I looked back up, the object was still there. But now I could see it a little more clearly. It wasn't flat, it had some depth to it, like a slightly angled surface. Then it tilted, just a small movement, like something adjusting its angle. The reflection shifted across it as it moved. The light slid along its surface, then disappeared. I held my breath. The object didn't move forward or backward, just that tilt. Then it started to rise. Not fast, not like something accelerating. It just lifted, straight up. The motion was smooth, controlled. No sudden change in speed. It climbed higher above the road. I slowed almost to a stop. The tires hummed softly against the asphalt. I leaned out slightly through the open window, trying to keep it in view. It kept rising. The shape became harder to see against the sky, only visible when my headlights caught it at the right angle. Another faint glint, then less, then nothing. It didn't shoot away, didn't streak across the sky. It just continued upward until it blended into the darkness. Gone. I sat there in the middle of the road for a few seconds, engine idling, hands still on the wheel. The night felt normal again. Quiet. Still. I looked up at the spot where it had been. Nothing. Just stars. I waited, half expecting it to come back down. It didn't. Eventually, I eased back onto the gas and started moving again. The car picked up speed. The road stretched out ahead of me like before. But something felt off. I kept glancing up at the sky even though there was nothing there. A few miles later, I noticed something else. My radio had gone quiet. I hadn't even realized when it stopped. The screen was still on, showing the station, but there was no sound. I turned the volume knob. Nothing. Then, without warning, the audio came back, mid-sentence, like it had skipped ahead. I checked the clock on the dashboard, 2:28 a.m. That didn't make sense. I was sure it had been around 2:10 when I first saw the reflection. I tried to think back through the drive. The moment I saw the flash, the object above the road, how long I'd been sitting there watching it rise. It didn't feel like nearly 20 minutes, more like a few minutes at most. I drove the rest of the way home without seeing anything else. When I pulled into my driveway, I shut off the engine and sat there for a moment. The headlights stayed on for a second before going out. In that brief window of light, I caught something in the rearview mirror. A faint reflection. High above the road behind me. Gone the moment the lights shut off. The power went out all at once. No flicker, no warning, just everything cutting to black mid-sentence while I was standing in the kitchen. The refrigerator stopped humming, the overhead light died, and the TV in the other room went silent. For a second, I just stood there, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. The house felt instantly different without electricity. Quieter, but not in a normal way. More like something had been removed that I didn't usually notice. I checked my phone. No signal bars. That was the first thing that felt off. Power outages happen, but losing signal at the same time wasn't typical, at least not where I lived. I was in a small neighborhood outside of Boise, not exactly remote. I walked over to the front window and pulled the curtain aside. The whole street was dark. No porch lights, no street lights, just a row of houses sitting in shadow. A couple of neighbors were already outside, silhouettes moving near their driveways. Someone down the block had a flashlight. I grabbed one from the drawer by the door and stepped outside. The air was cool, with that dry smell you get late at night in early fall. It must have been around 11:30 or so. "Power's out everywhere," my neighbor Greg said from across the street. He had his phone out, holding it up like it might suddenly reconnect if he moved it around enough. "Yeah, I've got no signal either," I said. "That's weird," he replied. "Mine's dead too." We stood there for a minute, looking up and down the street. A few more people had come outside. Quiet conversations, the faint click of flashlights turning on and off. No one seemed alarmed, just confused. I stepped a little farther out onto the sidewalk and looked up at the sky. Without the streetlights, it was darker than usual, but not pitch black. There was a thin layer of cloud cover, barely visible against the night. Then I noticed the glow. It was faint at first, a soft blue tint spreading through a patch of clouds directly above the neighborhood. Not bright enough to light anything below, just enough to make that section of sky stand out from the rest. I narrowed my eyes. The glow wasn't coming from the ground. It was inside the clouds, like they were lit from within. "Hey," I said, pointing upward. "Do you see that?" Greg followed my gesture. "Yeah, what is that?" A couple of other people nearby looked up too. The glow stayed steady, no flickering, no movement, just a dull, even blue spread across a section of cloud, maybe the size of a football field. I stepped out into the street to get a better view. The pavement was barely visible in the darkness. The glow above didn't seem to change in brightness. It didn't pulse or shift. It just hung there. I expected some kind of sound. Thunder, maybe, or wind. But the air was still. Completely still. Even the usual background noise, distant traffic, dogs barking was gone. It felt like the whole area had gone quiet at once. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. The time read 11:34 p.m. I looked back up. The glow hadn't moved. It wasn't drifting with the clouds. It stayed fixed in that one spot. Then I noticed something else. The edges of the glowing patch weren't soft. They were defined. Not sharply, but enough that you could tell where the glow stopped and the normal cloud cover began, like a boundary. Greg stepped closer to me. "That's not lightning," he said. I nodded. Lightning doesn't just sit there. It flashes, it flickers. This didn't. We stood there watching it for what felt like a few minutes. No one said much, just quiet, everyone looking up. Then the glow shifted, not across the sky, within itself. The blue deepened slightly, like the intensity had been turned up just a notch. I felt that tightness in my chest again. It wasn't fear, more like a pressure, a sense that something wasn't right. I glanced around at the others. Everyone was still focused on the sky. No one was talking now. Then, just as slowly as it had appeared, the glow started to fade. It didn't disappear all at once, it just became less noticeable. The blue softened, blending back into the gray of the clouds. Within a few seconds, it was gone. The sky looked normal again, just a faint layer of clouds against the night. There was a moment of silence. Then, almost immediately, the power came back. Streetlights flickered on, porch lights lit up, the hum of electricity returned all at once. People around me reacted. Some laughed, some said things like "finally" or "about time." The normal noise of the neighborhood came back too. Distant cars, a dog barking somewhere. I stood there for a second, adjusting to the sudden brightness. Then I checked my phone again. Signal bars were back. The time read 11:41 p.m. I frowned. That didn't line up. It hadn't felt like 7 minutes, maybe 3 at most. I scrolled back through my phone. No missed notifications, no messages, nothing from the time the signal had dropped. I looked back up at the sky one more time. The clouds were still there, but now they looked completely ordinary. No glow, no color. Just gray shapes drifting slowly overhead. Greg walked back toward his house. "Probably just a transformer or something," he said over his shoulder. "Yeah," I said, but I didn't really believe it. I stayed outside a little longer, watching the clouds. Everything looked normal again, but every now and then I thought I could see a faint hint of blue deep inside them. Just for a second. Then, it was gone. I noticed the pressure in my ears before I noticed the sky. It felt like when you're in an elevator that drops a little too fast, that quick shift where your ears need to pop. I swallowed automatically, expecting it to clear. It didn't. I was standing in my backyard, leaning against the fence, just getting some air. It had been a long day, and I couldn't sleep. My name's Evan, and I live in a small neighborhood outside Fort Collins, Colorado. Nothing remote, but quiet enough at night that you can hear the wind moving through the trees a few blocks over. It was a little after 1 a.m., cool, clear, no clouds when I first stepped outside. I remember that specifically. I had been looking up at the stars, trying to pick out anything familiar, but I'm not great at that. Then the pressure hit. Both ears at once. I swallowed again, then yawned, trying to force them to pop. Nothing. It wasn't painful, just uncomfortable, like something had changed in the air around me. I straightened up and looked around. The yard was still. The small maple tree near the back corner didn't move. No wind, no sound except for a faint hum from somewhere far off. I stepped away from the fence and walked a few feet into the grass. The pressure stayed the same. I tilted my head, trying to get my ears to adjust. Still nothing. That's when I looked up again. There were clouds now, thin ones, barely there. I was sure they hadn't been there a minute ago. They weren't moving like normal clouds either. They just existed, spread out unevenly across the sky like faint smudges. I frowned and focused on one section above me. That's when I saw the light. Small, dim, almost like a star, but softer. It was sitting between two patches of cloud. At first, I thought it was just a star partially obscured. But then it moved, slowly. Not across the sky like a plane or satellite. It drifted between the clouds, staying at the same altitude. I took a few steps forward, trying to get a clearer view. The grass felt damp under my feet. The light continued moving. Smooth, steady, no blinking, no change in brightness. I held my breath without realizing it. Something about the way it moved didn't match anything I'd seen before. It wasn't following a straight path. It was weaving slightly, like it was adjusting its direction in small increments. But there was no hesitation in the motion, no stops, just a continuous glide. The pressure in my ears didn't change. If anything, it felt slightly stronger. I swallowed again. Nothing. I looked around the yard, half expecting to see something else. There was nothing. The neighborhood was quiet. No lights turning on in nearby houses, no voices. It felt like I was the only one outside. When I looked back up, the light had moved farther across the sky. Now it was partially behind one of the thin clouds. It didn't dim. The cloud didn't seem to affect it. It just passed behind it, still visible, like the cloud wasn't really there. I felt that tightness in my chest again. Not fear exactly, more like anticipation. I took another step forward, even though there was nowhere to go. The fence was behind me now, the yard open in front. The light slowed, just slightly. Then it stopped, perfectly still. I stared at it. The clouds around it didn't move either. Everything felt frozen. I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3. The light stayed in place. Then it drifted again, this time in a different direction, not following its original path. It moved diagonally, cutting across the clouds. The motion was smooth, effortless. I couldn't hear anything. No engine, no wind, nothing. The pressure in my ears suddenly eased, just a little. I swallowed again, and this time they popped. The relief was immediate. I exhaled slowly. When I looked back up, the light was fading, not quickly, just becoming less noticeable, like it was being turned down. Within a few seconds, it was gone. The clouds above me started to shift again, slowly drifting the way clouds normally do. The sky felt normal, open, the stars visible again through the gaps. I stood there for a minute, listening. The usual night sounds came back. A car passing somewhere in the distance, a dog barking a few houses over, the faint rustle of leaves. Everything felt like it had before. I checked my phone, 1:18 a.m. That made me pause. I was sure it had been closer to 1:05 when I first stepped outside. It didn't feel like I'd been standing there that long. I scrolled through my phone out of habit. No new notifications, no missed messages, nothing. I put it back in my pocket and looked up at the sky again. No sign of the light, just stars and thin clouds moving normally. I went back inside and closed the door. The house felt quiet, but in a normal way again. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. As I stood there, I noticed something small. The pressure in my ears hadn't fully gone away. It was faint now, barely noticeable, but still there. And when I swallowed again, it didn't change. I noticed the compass before I noticed anything in the sky. I was about halfway along a ridge trail in the San Juan Mountains, a little outside Silverton. It was late afternoon, maybe around 6:30, and the sun was already dropping behind the peaks. The air was cooler up there, thin and dry, with that faint metallic smell you sometimes get in high elevation. I'd hiked that trail before. Not often, but enough to know it well. The ridge runs narrow for a stretch, with a steep drop on one side and a gradual slope on the other. The path itself is easy to follow, just packed dirt and loose rock. I had my phone out because I was checking how much farther I had to go before turning back. That's when I noticed the compass. It wasn't pointing straight north. Not exactly. It was off by just a little. At first, I thought it was just calibration. Phones do that sometimes. I held it flat, moved it in a figure eight, tried to reset it. The needle steadied, but it didn't correct. It stayed slightly off, not spinning, not erratic, just wrong. I frowned and looked around. There was nothing nearby that should interfere with it. No metal structures, no power lines, just rock, dirt, and scattered trees lower down the slope. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and kept walking. A few steps later, I felt something else. A faint pressure. Not in my ears exactly, more like in my head. Like the moment before a headache, but without the pain. I stopped and stood still. The wind had died down. The ridge felt unusually quiet. I reached for my phone again and checked the compass. Still off. Same slight angle. I turned my body slowly, watching the needle. It responded to my movement, but it never lined up perfectly, always just a few degrees off. I looked up at the horizon. The sun was nearly gone now, just a faint glow behind the mountains. The sky above it was darker, shifting toward blue-gray. That's when I saw it, a dim glow just above the horizon line. It was faint enough that I almost missed it, not bright like a light source, more like a soft patch of illumination in the air. I stood there, staring at it. The glow didn't spread, didn't move. It just sat there, hovering above the distant peaks. I tried to tell myself it was the last of the sunlight catching something, a cloud maybe, but there weren't any clouds. The sky had been clear all afternoon. I took a step forward. The gravel shifted under my boot, the glow stayed in place. Then it pulsed, just once. A brief increase in brightness, not sharp, not sudden. More like it swelled slightly, then returned to its original dim state. I felt that pressure in my head again, stronger this time. I swallowed, trying to clear it. It didn't help. I looked down at my phone. The compass needle had moved. Not much, but more off than before. I turned slowly, watching it. The needle lagged behind my movement for a second, then caught up, but it still didn't settle correctly. I looked back up at the glow. It hadn't moved. The color was hard to pin down. Not white, not yellow. Something in between, but muted. Like it was being filtered through something. The air around me felt still. Too still. No wind, no sound. Even the faint rustle of leaves from below the ridge had stopped. I took another step forward. The glow didn't react. I waited. Nothing changed. Then, slowly, it began to fade, not disappearing all at once, just becoming less noticeable, like my eyes were losing the ability to see it. Within a few seconds, it was gone. The horizon looked normal again, just the dark outline of mountains against the sky. I stood there for a moment, trying to process it. Then I looked down at my phone again. The compass needle snapped back to normal, perfectly aligned. I turned in a full circle. It stayed steady, exactly where it should be. The pressure in my head eased, not instantly, but gradually. I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. The wind picked up again, lightly brushing against my jacket. I could hear it moving through the trees below. Everything felt normal. I checked the time, 7:02 p.m. That made me pause. I was sure it had been closer to 6:40 when I first noticed the compass. It didn't feel like I'd been standing there that long. I tried to think back. How long I'd been watching the glow, how long the needle had been off. It didn't add up. I stood there for another minute looking out over the horizon. Nothing else appeared. No light, no movement, just the fading twilight. Eventually, I turned around and started heading back down the trail. The path felt familiar again, solid under my feet. But every few steps, I found myself checking my phone, watching the compass, making sure it stayed aligned. It did, all the way down. When I reached my car at the trailhead, I sat there for a minute before starting the engine. I pulled my phone out one more time. The compass was still steady, pointing exactly north. I set it down on the passenger seat and looked up at the ridge. The sky above it was completely dark now. No glow, no movement. But for a second, I thought I saw something faint, a small shift in the darkness above the horizon. Then, it was gone. I felt it before I saw anything. Just a quick vibration through the seat, like someone had lightly kicked the underside of the car. I was parked in a grocery store lot, engine off, waiting for my brother Caleb to come out. It was around 9:40 p.m., late enough that the place had mostly emptied out, but not completely dead. A few cars were still scattered around. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting that dull white glow over everything. I had my phone in my hand, scrolling, not really paying attention to anything. Then the seat shifted under me. Just once. Not strong. Not enough to move the car, but enough that I felt it clearly through my back. I looked up immediately. My first thought was someone had tapped the bumper or something. I checked the side mirrors. Nothing. No car pulling out. No one walking behind me. The lot looked the same as it had a second ago. Quiet. Still. I sat there for a moment, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I exhaled and leaned back slightly, telling myself it was probably just the car settling or something. Then I glanced at the rearview mirror. That's when I saw the glow. It was faint, barely there. A soft patch of light hovering behind the car, maybe 20 or 30 feet back. Not bright enough to light anything up, just enough to stand out against the darker asphalt. I straightened up. The glow didn't move. It didn't flicker. Just hung there. I turned my head and looked directly out the back window. Nothing. Just the empty parking lot. A row of carts near the entrance. A couple of cars farther out. No light. I looked back at the mirror. The glow was still there. Same spot. Same faint intensity. I frowned and leaned closer to the mirror, adjusting the angle slightly. The glow shifted with it, stayed centered in the reflection. I turned around again, this time pressing my face closer to the glass to see if I was missing something. Still nothing. No light source, no reflection from another car. Just darkness. I sat back slowly. My chest felt a little tight. I looked at the mirror again. The glow remained. I reached up and dimmed the mirror slightly, thinking maybe it was some kind of glare. The glow stayed exactly the same. I turned my head side to side, watching how the reflection changed. Everything else in the mirror shifted normally, the light poles, the parked cars, but the glow stayed fixed, like it wasn't tied to the scene behind me. I swallowed. Then the glow dimmed, just a little, not disappearing, just becoming harder to see. I leaned forward again, trying to keep it in view. For a second, it looked like it stretched slightly, not in shape, but in how it spread, like it wasn't a solid thing. Then it faded completely. Gone. I stared at the mirror. Nothing there now, just the normal reflection of the lot. I sat there for a few seconds, trying to process it. Then I checked the time on my phone. 9:52 p.m. That made me pause. I was sure it had been around 9:40 when I first felt the vibration. I tried to think back. How long I'd been sitting there. How long I'd been looking at the glow. It didn't feel like 10 minutes, more like a minute or two. I looked up at the store entrance. Still no sign of Caleb. I glanced back at the mirror. Nothing. Everything looked normal again. A car drove past a few rows over. The headlights swept across the lot, reflecting briefly in my mirror. Completely different from what I'd seen. Sharp. Defined. Gone as soon as the car passed. I leaned back again, trying to relax. My hands felt a little tense on the steering wheel. Then, just as I was about to pick up my phone again, I felt it. Another vibration. This one softer. More like a hum than a jolt. It lasted maybe a second. Then stopped. I froze. My eyes moved slowly to the rearview mirror. Nothing. No glow this time. Just the empty lot. I turned around again, looking out the back window. Still nothing. I exhaled slowly. Then I noticed something else. The lot seemed quieter, not silent, but quieter than it should be. The overhead lights still buzzed faintly, but I couldn't hear any cars moving. No distant engines. Nothing. I looked around. Everything appeared normal, but the sound felt muted. I checked my phone again. 9:53 p.m. Only a minute had passed. I stared at the screen for a second, then I locked it and set it down. A few seconds later, I saw Caleb walking out of the store. He had a bag in one hand, looking down at his own phone as he crossed the lot. I watched him approach in the mirror. Completely normal. No glow behind him. No distortion. Just him. He opened the passenger door and got in. "Sorry, line was longer than I thought," he said. I nodded. "Did you feel anything just now?" I asked. "Like what?" I hesitated. "Like the car moving or something." He shook his head. "No." "Why?" "Nothing," I said. He shrugged and set the bag down. I started the engine. The car came to life normally. I checked the mirror one last time before putting it in reverse. For a split second, I thought I saw it again, that faint glow, right where it had been before. Then it disappeared as the car began to move. I didn't see anything that night. That's the part that bothers me. I went to bed around 11:20, same as usual. Nothing out of the ordinary. No noise outside, no lights through the curtains, nothing that would have made me look twice. The next morning, around 8, I was outside grabbing the trash bins when my neighbor Lila walked over from across the street. She didn't even say good morning. She just asked, "Were you up late last night?" I said no, I'd been asleep. She kind of hesitated, then said, "I thought maybe you had people over or something. There were lights above your house." That made me stop. "What kind of lights?" She shrugged, looking back toward my place. "Not like normal lights. They weren't from inside. They were up, over the roof, just sitting there." I laughed a little, thinking she meant a drone or something. "Like a drone?" She shook her head. "No, it didn't move like that. It just stayed there. I watched it for a while." "How long?" I don't know, maybe a few minutes, then it just went out. The way she said it made me pause. She wasn't joking. She wasn't exaggerating. She looked genuinely confused. I glanced up at my house. Everything looked normal. No damage, no signs of anything. "What time was this?" I asked. "After midnight. I couldn't sleep, so I was sitting by the window. I saw it right above your place." I nodded slowly. "Okay, I've got cameras. I'll check." She said something like, "Yeah, you should," and walked back to her house. I stood there for a second, looking up at the roofline. Nothing out of place. Then I went inside. I have a basic security setup. Front door, backyard, and one camera angled up enough to catch part of the roof and sky above it. I pulled up the footage on my phone and scrolled back to around midnight. Everything looked normal at first. Dark yard, faint light from the street, nothing moving. I sped it up, watching for anything unusual. At 12:37 a.m., the video flickered, just for a frame. I slowed it down and played it again. Right before the flicker, everything looked normal. Then a single frame of brightness, not full white, but washed out. Then back to normal. I scrubbed forward. A few seconds later, it happened again. This time, it wasn't just a flicker. The image distorted. Lines ran across the screen like the video had glitched. I zoomed in. The distortion covered the entire frame, but I could still make out shapes underneath. The roofline, the edge of the yard, but the sky above looked wrong. Not brighter, just different. Like the pixels didn't line up. I paused it. The timestamp read 12:37:12. I advanced one frame. The timestamp jumped to 12:19. 7 seconds gone. No footage in between. I leaned back slightly. That didn't make sense. I replayed that section again. Same thing. Normal frame, corrupted frame. Jump forward in time. I checked the backyard camera next. Same timestamp, same flicker. But this time, I noticed something else. During the corrupted frame, the shadows in the yard didn't match the light. They were too sharp, too defined, like the light source wasn't coming from any direction I could identify. I zoomed in further. At the top edge of the frame, just above the roofline, there was a faint glow, not bright, just a pale wash of light. It didn't have a clear shape. It just sat there. I scrubbed forward again. Another glitch. Another jump in time. 12:30:26. More missing seconds. I checked the front camera. Same pattern. Flicker. Corruption. Time skip. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to line it up. Each camera had the same gaps, not identical down to the second, but overlapping, like something had interfered with all of them at once. I went back to the first corrupted frame and stared at it longer. This time, I noticed something I hadn't before. The light above the roof wasn't steady. It had variation, not flickering, but uneven, like it was shifting slightly within itself. I advanced one frame, normal image, dark sky, no light. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, trying to make sense of it. Then I checked the audio. The cameras record sound too. Before the glitch, I could hear the usual night noise, distant traffic, a faint breeze. Then, right at the moment of the flicker, everything cut out. No sound at all, not even static, just silence. After the glitch, the sound came back immediately. I played that section a few more times. Every time, the same thing. Sound, silence, sound again. I checked the system logs, no errors, no alerts, no indication that anything had gone wrong, just missing time. I sat there for a while, scrolling through the rest of the night. Nothing else stood out, no movement, no more glitches, just that one stretch around 12:37. Eventually, I got up and walked outside. The morning light made everything look normal. The roof, the yard, the street. I looked up at the sky, clear, no clouds, nothing unusual. I walked around the house, checking the ground near the edges. No marks, no disturbed grass, nothing. When I came back around to the front, I saw Lila standing in her yard again. She looked over. "Did you find anything?" I hesitated. "Just a glitch in the cameras," I said. She didn't look convinced. "I know what I saw," she said. I nodded. "Yeah." We stood there for a second. Then she went back inside. I stayed outside a little longer, looking up at the roof. Everything looked exactly the same. But later that night, when I checked the cameras again before going to bed, I noticed something small. The timestamp on one of the clips from earlier had changed. Not the time itself, just the spacing. The gap where those missing seconds were, it was slightly longer than before. I noticed my shadow first. It was late, close to midnight, and I was walking home from a friend's place a few blocks over. The neighborhood was quiet, just rows of older houses with narrow sidewalks and those tall streetlights that cast that orange glow on everything. My name's Marcus. I'd taken that same route home dozens of times. There's one stretch where the streetlights are spaced farther apart, so your shadow stretches long and thin in front of you, then disappears for a few steps, then comes back again under the next light. I was just walking, hands in my pockets, not thinking about anything. Then something felt off. Not a sound, not a movement, just off. I glanced down without really meaning to. My shadow was still there, stretched out in front of me under the streetlight, but it wasn't matching me exactly.